those of you who have not been here before, everybody has 3 minutes. You can come up to the front here. I'll time you. It'll go off at the end, and we look forward to hearing from you. So first up is Tom Zinnan.
Hi, I'm Tom Zinnan.
If you sit down and speak into the mic, that will record you
Sorry
for those folks who are watching at home. Thank you. You got it.
Thank you. My name's Tom Zinnan. I live at 1636 Adams Street. Both my children, who are 14 and 12, go to the schools here, Madison schools. Real briefly, I just want to support the idea of the referendum. Anything you can do to help fuel the interest that parents and other folks have in speeding this process and ensuring a successful outcome in November 2020, I'd be happy to help with. I'm part of the Madison West Community Organization, and I'm their liaison to the Madison West Athletic Boosters Association, which is also taking a role in that. That's only one of the 4 high schools, but I think all of us would be very hopeful, looking forward to the referendum and making sure it passes. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Jackie Cooper.
Hi, my name is Jackie Bastier Cooper. I'm a parent at West. You've seen me before. I'm here to speak about the facilities proposals. First off, I would like to thank Chad Weezy and his staff, as well as the designers, for their continued efforts on the facility proposals. However, what is being proposed is not enough. I would like to ask the board to really think about what you want out of these proposals and what the community wants, and ultimately what the students need to help prepare them to graduate from high school ready for college, career, and community. Basic fixes to 4 high schools that have been neglected for decades, that's what this proposal does. Or do you want to do innovative changes that could be life-changing for the next generation of students, making these high schools places that will make people want to move to this district? Why would a family move to Madison to attend the Madison schools when they could choose to move to Verona or Sun Prairie, where they are literally building state-of-the-art high schools for their community? Verona approved $183 million for 1 new high school, a high school that is over 100,000 square feet larger than East, which is the largest high school in Madison, with about the same number of students. A high school that will have a state-of-the-art performing arts center, a greenhouse, athletic field for practice and competition on their school grounds, a second indoor 8-lane warm water pool, and they will have a website, and they have a website now that provides the community with bi-monthly updates, including photos from the construction manager. You're looking at a referendum to update 4 high schools with a $286 million price tag, with over 40% of that, $121 million, on capital maintenance. Maintenance on these buildings that has been neglected for years. I ask that you think about the future, not only for the schools, but also the future of Madison. Verona is thinking about the future. Sun Prairie is thinking about the future. And people who are looking to purchase homes, the same people that you are asking to fund your referendums, are going to be looking at the quality and condition of the schools to make their choices. Thank you.
Sarah Anderson.
Hello. I want to thank everyone that has worked very hard on all of these facility studies and assessment and for the 2020 referendum. And I am here to talk a lot about the dollar amount. I don't know where it came from, why it's set at $286 million. I think that would be a good question to answer for the public, because as Jackie stated, I mean, it's not enough. I mean, we're putting $73 million in the most recent proposal into West, and 40% of that is in capital maintenance, deferred maintenance that has been neglected for years. We need to look forward and ask the public. I don't know where this dollar came from. I can obviously read all of the debt service. I mean, if you look at it, Verona's at the top. Verona's investing $3,209. Then you have Sun Prairie, that's at $2,100. Then you have Middleton, that was at $866, and then you have Madison, that's on the floor at $471. I mean, it's $15.77 a month. You read it right, $214 a year. I mean, where did we come up with this, and why is it so low? you know, is that what we want to tell our community that they're worth, that our kids are worth, that our students are worth? This is, you know, a failure from years ago that we're trying to fix. And it shouldn't have ever gotten this bad, but it did. So let's try to fix it. We need to look at our future and not put ourselves in this situation again. I also would ask that if we could try with the designers and everybody to look at alternative funding. Like, if we do want this, what would it cost for that? Because if we are going to keep it at $286 million, let the community say, you know what, we're willing to fundraise and build this, but let's do it together and let's do it now and not build something and then have to redo something in order to get where we wanted to go. I think it's extremely important to give them those options. I know we want to start a capital campaign. We can't do that till we know what this referendum is. And if we have those numbers and those options, I think we could move forward with a lot of community members. But we have to have those. It can't be stuck at, nope, we can't do it now because the footings aren't there, or this isn't there, and it's going to cost us $36 million to do that now. And so I just, at those opportunities, I think the community's going to ask about, I think, and it would just be great to have it ahead of time. All of our surrounding communities have done so and have stepped up. And again, it's difficult to think that you would buy a home when you're going to raise kids in a community that isn't, you know, is maybe 10% of what they're putting into their kids. They're putting 85% of what we're putting into our kids. They're gonna look at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Ed Hughes.
Hi, my name's Ed Hughes. It was interesting to look at the materials for tonight's meeting and to see the exciting building excellence plans for our 4 main high schools. There's a lot to talk about in those plans, but I want to focus tonight on the referendum that we'll have to pass in order to bring those plans to fruition. If the board decides to go to referendum in November 2020, I think it's useful to bear in mind that most voters won't pore over those blueprints and they won't be looking at the charts of comparative mill rates. They'll be basing their vote in large part on their confidence or their lack of confidence in the school district. And by the school district, I mean the superintendent and the school board. And we expect at that point that you will have selected a new superintendent, but he or she will be new and will not have had a hand in shaping the referendum. And so, to an unusual degree, the confidence of the community in this board will really be important to the potential success of the referendum. Now, as you know, individual board members speak to a lot of different audiences. You speak to students, you speak to families, you speak to teachers and staff, you speak to communities of color, you speak to the disability community, and there are others. And individual board members have their own experiences and expertise that uniquely enable them to address particular audiences effectively and to address their concerns in a way that resonates with the audience. And with a well-functioning board, individual board members will defer to each other, both formally and informally, with respect to the particular issues with which individual board members may have expertise. Now, the audience for this referendum is a particularly large one. It's all the voters in Madison. It's all the property owners. It's people who don't have kids in schools. It's families who have chosen to pay to send their kids to private schools. And it's retirees on fixed incomes who are struggling to retain their homes. And you're going to have to convince more than half of them to vote to raise their taxes to a not insignificant amount. You may be able to tell where I'm going on this. You will have an opportunity to appoint a new board member to fill Mary's large shoes, and in a way that will complement the wide array of skills and expertise that your current board members currently have. I would suggest that you keep in mind the needs of the referendum when you're making that choice. And you may want to consider someone who would be able to speak effectively to that broader audience, and both broadly and narrowly in making that selection. And I wish you the best of luck in that choice. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Andy Olson.
Good evening. My name's Andy Olson, and I'm here to speak to the ethics matter complaint, which I was a signatory to, regarding the referendum. It sounds like a great idea, support our schools. In regards to the ethics complaint, I would just like to make a few points. I sent out an email earlier today, but you may not have had time to read that. The first thing is just in response to the letter from who's this attorney? From the attorney for Chair Reyes. Within that is an excerpt from a memo from General Counsel Bell, which is not, I would point out, publicly available. It's not listed with the materials for this meeting. Andy Height requested a copy, and Mr. Bell said we've got 10 days to meet an open records request, so he didn't pick up the electronic file and attach it to an email and share it, which we think that's kind of a problem in terms of transparency. But he hangs a lot on the city being a partner, and then
You're good. You can
and
keep
then
going.
goes
Yep.
to the an addendum to the agreement, as I understand, that was passed at that meeting in question. And my point to you is that meeting was not that was not passed at the time that the events in question happened. So the thing that was passed contained what he says is a partnership agreement, which is basically, I understand, a scope of services. And if it wasn't passed, then it wasn't in place when this happened. I hope that's clear. And so, this whole business about the partner is kind of surprising. There was no understanding that there was a partnership agreement in place with the city of Madison. So it just appears to us that the city is a vendor providing services for pay, and that there is no existing partnership agreement. You might want to consider putting that in place in the future for such things. And just speaking from my own personal perspective, the reason I signed on to this was a general concern about ethics from the top to the bottom of American government, local to federal level, and that we need to start tightening things up a bit. And then this happened. There were a lot of reasons to raise eyebrows, and we're not asking for anybody to be punished or fines or anything like that, just that this be addressed and fixed going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and then the last speaker is Jean Devitt. Yeah.
Sorry. to
No,
interrupt,
you're,
Chair.
no,
I
no,
just
you're,
wanted to make
you're,
sure.
you're all good.
I'd like a pizza. Just call, I'll pick it up.
All right, you're good.
Hi, I'm Gene Devitt. I went to West High. I kind of got drawn into this by this referendum papers and stuff about West. And my background is as I'm the chairman of Mansion Hill. And up on Mansion Hill, we've had a lot of different projects go on in terms of MATC, the Edgewater, et cetera. I'm a landlord. I own a couple of mansions up on the hill. The reason I bring this up, I'm very familiar with buildings. One of my best friends is Fred Mose. He couldn't make it tonight. After looking at all the papers here, I feel there's a lot of wasted money actually in work that does not need to be done at West. For instance, first thing I think you should do, since West is a complex of series of buildings built in over a large period of time. And I've always felt that the only place to expand West, if you needed to, was the football field, the practice football field. But my understanding, you put some type of heating thing underneath it. That's not working very well right now. But the first thing I would do is make a model of the block showing the buildings. And then when they say, we want the swimming pool over here, you pick up that block and see if it fits over there and if it makes logic. Another example, I have pages and pages of things that I don't think need to be done or could be done better. For example, a welcome center. My understanding is this is where students will come in. I understand Ash Street is not the best for handicap, except most people think west, the entranceway, is Regent Street, which is already handicapped. It sounds like to me that the administration would like new offices over there. When I knew Mr. McPike, he was my grade principal, and then I used to sell computers at East High, is that one of the things he said to me, and I asked him, why are the principal's offices for the grades in different parts of the building? He said the reason why was that then we can look after all those areas. It should not be condensed in one area, meaning that the 11th grade principal's office may be over in the old junior high, etc. I think also reading about the heating system and the plumbing systems when they say all the pipes need to be ripped out. I would like to see actually the heating system and these things. I agree that the school needs work, there's no doubt about it. I think that the maintenance is one of the things that has not been done to the building that's going to cost you a lot of money. Another example, when I was talking to people and they said cafeterias are overpopulated and stuff, and I said, how is that done? Because my class was one of the largest there. I think we had roughly 2,400 students on the block. I think there's 2,000 now. And they said, well, they have to use the old gym, the original gym, and the cafeteria. And I said, why is this? Because you have lunch at the same hour. We used to have different lunch hours for different people, and this would accommodate all the students. These are small things I'm bringing up, but I believe, especially the windows. I remember I used to know the Klein-Dickert family, and the Capitol wanted to replace all the windows in the building. They pulled them out, they stripped them, they found their cherry. There's nothing wrong with the windows in the older parts that I see, but all this should be analyzed piece by piece. I would like to be on one of your boards, too. That's it. Thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you. All right, that concludes public appearances tonight. We have the approval of the minutes, and then Chad and Kelly can come up and join us. So the approval of the minutes, it is recommended to approve the minutes from the Operations Work Group meeting dated January 14th, 2019. Do I have a motion?
What channel is this on TV, by the way?
There's a YouTube channel.
Huh?
There's a YouTube channel.
You can Google it on
Yeah.
the website,
Oh.
and the link is right there.
I moved approval of the minutes.
Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, that passes 4-0. So our one topic for this evening is our Building Excellence Plan and Long Range Facilities Plan, which we have had several opportunities of late to engage in, and there was a really nice set of poster boards outside actually for us to get our first maybe physical, visual look at what some of these plans might be shaping up to. So I don't know, Jen, if you have anything to kick us off, or Chad, if you...
No, I think Chad should
If
just
you
dive
do.
right in. Let's go for it.
Great.
Well, as Kate mentioned, we're frequent visitors to the school
good, we
boards.
like it.
I believe we've tabbed this version 10 or report number 10 on the kind of this go around. So thanks again for having us. We think we've got some interesting things to review tonight. We're hoping to reach closure on some things and actually get direction to keep work moving on others. Once again, Kelly and Andrew are with me, so thanks for having us. I don't need to spend a ton of time on the first two slides because we've seen them so many times. Goals for our presentation, our time together. One, we want to review an updated draft of the long-range facilities plan, draft in bold, because we still think that there are some things that probably need to be tweaked and edited before we send it for your approval and vote. Hopefully at the end of this month or a little bit after. Two, really interested in, and we all know we ran short in our last time together, very interested in your feedback relative to the community engagement and input plan, specifically pointed towards the 2020 referendum. Kelly's going to give us another detailed and more detailed look at some financial projections related to that plan and potentially referendum or referenda that will potentially come afterwards. And we're going to update the timeline. So as a reminder, these were all the different buckets of work that we attempted to get to and drill down to with our comprehensive plan. We don't need to go through these in great detail. Certainly tonight, as we look towards 2020, and that's what Andrew is going to be mentioning, and Kelly will, back again to our 4 high schools, a 5th high school, Capitol High, and a major reinvestment when it comes to something happening with Nuestra Mundo and South Alice. So we'll get into that in a little bit. We did want to spend a little bit of time debriefing some of the feedback we've received from the board over the last month, in particular at the retreat, and moves we've made within the plan to hopefully address some of the feedback that we've heard. To start, we wanted to just reiterate, and I actually, a couple of our public speakers mentioned this as well, what a wonderful opportunity this is, not only just the plan and giving guidance to our team, but for sure what's possible in terms of the 2020 referendum. And look forward to continuing to work with you on this. We wanted to remind folks the purpose of the Building Excellence Plan, and I think in a nutshell, our team is hoping that this is a guidance document that is fluid. From the day we take draft off it, it's going to change, and enrollments will change. What we're putting in the 2020 referendum will change, and our strategic next steps in terms of 3, 5, 7, 10-year planning will change. And more than anything, this is a document to give us some guidance. It is not a strict implementation plan full of checkboxes, full of making promises that future board members will have to either peel back and say, nope, I don't want what the other board members said, or boxing them in like another plan that has very strict implementation guidelines. It's a guidance document. It is a resource. I'm proud of this team. I don't think anything like this has ever been created in the history of this district in terms of how comprehensive this set of resources is. We've heard again and again wanting to make sure that we make equity-based decisions and continue to consider equity-based moves in the plan. We've actually pulled out in each section and highlighted where we think we've made very explicit equity-based moves, and I hope you took note of that change. We've heard from a few folks wonderings and questioning around if we have a presence in South Alice in terms of a new site, whether that is a K-12 neighborhood school or the possibility of becoming Nuestra Mundo and having a charter presence down in that neighborhood. We'd like to think that once we get through Andrew's portion of the community impact input strategy, that is the exact type of thing we would be asking our community in terms of what they need. And we're okay moving the plan forward with a guideline or a consideration, knowing that we're heading to the community for the next 3-4 months to ask that very same question. And that we'll be back in January to report exactly what we've heard from the community and then continue to work with the school board on what's going to be in the 2020 referendum. So by signing off on our guidance document tonight, or at least giving us feedback and voting later on this month, we know that community impact will be absolutely critical through this entire thing. And lastly, we've heard us stressed again and again that we don't think we're addressing instructional spaces enough through the current 2020 referendum. And we hope that even tonight on your walk-in, you started to see what's possible, what we believe is possible with the $70 or $75 million spend through that referendum. We do think we can have a meaningful, long-lasting impact that will change the instructional spaces at all of those sites. This was just one of the examples in terms of reimagining instructional spaces I just wanted to call your attention to. I even heard a couple of our speakers tonight mention again the deferred maintenance and how much deferred maintenance is baked into this package. The fact of the matter is, new lights, new ceilings, new floors, new furniture, a comfortable environment for our students are all things we would consider to be deferred maintenance items, but can actually have a really big impact on classroom instruction. Embed flexible furniture, and all of a sudden you put a glass wall between two science classrooms and a gutted lab that all, in many cases, is deferred maintenance. Many of these things should have been replaced years ago. You can have a very meaningful impact in terms of reimagining instructional spaces, and even though some of it is under the guise of being deferred maintenance, which we all know we need to take care of before we get to some of that stuff just to make sure our buildings continue to function. So I kind of sped through that. We wanted to leave plenty of time to have back and forth in terms of what your thoughts are with the plan, if you're comfortable with our timeline, and any last minute edits we can make before we potentially send it to vote here in a couple weeks.
Do we want to
Floor is
pause?
yours.
Well, I was just going to say, do you want to pause at in between the financial section and this? There's a couple, I think there's a couple more pages here, and then we can pause
So
in terms of community.
yeah, so here's the way this, at least that our deck's laid out.
Okay.
We're interested in some feedback relative to the plan, and
And
hopefully
then
clear
just on the
next
community
steps.
engagement piece.
And then
Okay,
we're going to
that's
move to
fine.
Andrew's community engagement piece.
That's fine.
And then we'll close with Kelly's financials. 3 chunks. Yep.
Okay, great.
As long as you're okay with that.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with it.
Yep.
I think we may end up tackling a couple at once, but that's fine.
Correct.
Okay, so pause now for feedback on the plan.
Correct.
All right, great. Ali, do you have any feedback that you want to dive in with before we get going? This is in specific on the long-range facility plan.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think in terms of the deferred maintenance, I would love if you could speak to kind of in the long term, what it looks like to position ourselves to no longer be deferring maintenance and to have a better relationship with routine maintenance, and how this plan gets us to that point in the long run.
So I think if I'm hearing you correctly, what are our thoughts in terms of essentially avoiding the situation we're in right now?
Yeah.
Is that what she's asking?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so Ali, we know every budget cycle's tight. I can tell you in my for maintaining even newer buildings in commercial spaces or K-12 spaces is about $2 a square foot a year. You need to reinvest into the sites to keep them kind of treading water. Right now, we're about half of that in terms of what we're reinvesting just in our operating budget. And that's come through years and years of really difficult budget decisions. So I think you solve that in one of 2 ways. You would solve that by strategically saying we're going to start to set aside operating money and bump it up in the budget, so we don't get ourselves in this situation again. Or you do it like we're doing it right now, which is really ripping the Band-Aid off and paying for years of underfunding the operating side of maintaining these sites.
Yeah.
That's really, it's one of 2 ways.
Yeah,
Make
and-
strategic decisions on the operating or potentially maintenance.
And I would
on the
say,
referendum.
Ali, that it's both.
Yep.
Because we're digging ourselves out of such a big hole.
Correct.
We feel like we have to address the long-standing maintenance issues through the referendum. And in order to maintain in the future, which I think is what you're getting at, we have to build just an adequate budget for it, an annual budget, which in the past, what has our target been, Kelly? Do you remember off the top of your head? Maybe you know, Chad.
We were using some of the TID money to add $500,000 a year. So this conversation, and that's done a lot of our playgrounds, libraries. So that was their original kind of goal, was to
There
bump
was
it
a
up over the
study,
years.
and I'm going to get it for you, Ali, but Mike Berry always quoted a specific number that we should have in the budget.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to kind of incrementally get ourselves there. But I'll get that information for
I
you.
think it was 2014, and
Yeah,
I think,
I do.
and I think the number was
very
$8
much
million.
appreciate you all
That
speaking
sounds
to that,
right.
and also I appreciate just kind of the need to address this current moment and think beyond this current moment
Yes.
simultaneously.
Yeah.
I would love to see the study. I also say I think we're backing ourselves into a corner. If long term we can kind of if we have a pattern of getting into a pretty desperate place in terms of facilities, and so I think part of what makes me want to invest in something is knowing that it's going to be it's going to be upkept and cared for and sustainable in the long term. And so I think being able to speak to that plan is really relevant. Thank you both so much for answering my question.
Yeah, agree. And Ali, if that's not in the facilities plan as it stands, we should make sure that there's some section that addresses ongoing maintenance costs. Thank you.
Nikki?
My big one is going to be, I think the referendum piece, I think it should be on the 4 high schools. I think those have the most need that we're hearing that the most. I'm not saying our elementary and middle schools don't need it, they do. And anything left over, I think, then should go to middle and to elementary to do it that way. My two problems with the plan are as follows. Quadrant system divides people in the same district. Marquette is separate from schools near it. I don't understand why it's separate, and I've read it about 4 times, and I'm, as a board member who is pretty seasoned, and as an attorney, if I'm confused by it, the general public is also going to be confused by it, and I don't want confusion going into a referendum. I don't want that. The other issue is, and this one is no offense to administration, so please don't take any offense. No, I know Doyle needs work, don't get me wrong. But the optics of doing it before all the schools are done, I'm afraid he's going to send the wrong message.
We don't take offense to that, Nikki. Don't
I always-
worry about that. Don't worry about that. Can we-
Because
yeah.
I truly believe that, does Doyle need work? Yes.
Yeah.
Not saying it doesn't. But we have put some improvements into the building, so therefore, I know 207 finally got done. I'm thrilled. We now finally have comfortable chairs in the auditorium. My back doesn't kill me. But at the same point, I just want all of our schools done before we consider a new home.
Yeah.
So there's a very specific reason why Doyle is in the plan at this point in time, and it's a market-driven reason. If we can get an offer to purchase Doyle at a point where we can not only move central office and make money that we can put back into schools, we think that win-win exists now. As the market starts to shift, as interest rates start to change, it's a very good chance that if you're looking out 10 years, that those options may not exist. So we're not saying this is happening in the short run. We don't have the time or capacity necessarily to do it in the short run. We are saying we should keep our eye on this ball before we lose an opportunity to make money for the district.
Yeah,
I
that's right.
thought of one more question, if I may, Chair.
Please. Sure.
Being that this is a historic building, will that affect the ability for resale?
Absolutely, but that is already built into the market rate of this building, and whoever would make that determination would clearly have it built
Wouldn't be
in.
our problem to
That
solve.
would be
Got
their
it.
problem.
That's
yeah.
what I needed to know.
That's exactly right. Can we talk about the quadrants, like your
Yes.
Marquette, Lapham? Because I've heard that concern from others. Is that all right if you just pause there
Please,
for
yeah,
a
no,
second, Kate, and
I was
maybe
going to say
hear-
the same thing.
Yeah.
So, no, it's
Okay.
good. Let's pause here.
Yeah.
Well, the purpose of the quadrants was not to cause any confusion or separation or anything like that. The quadrants we put together for a couple of, we thought at the time, advantages. So one is to take a look at where our students are relative to where our schools are. And that's difficult to do given kind of the geographic container of existing attendance boundaries. We also recognize that looking at a community of over 250,000 residents, over 27,000 students, couldn't be done very easily as one big geography. So we decided to kind of carve the district up into 4 different segments based on readily identifiable landmarks like East Wash. We can go through and revise any of our content based on 4 conventional high school attendance areas. That's easy enough done. It's
That
just
would be really
something that we would need time to do. Do know that it would not change any of the findings or recommendations. The dynamics that we see at play, namely the 4 high schools needing attention that would exist regardless of which data container or geographic container you're using. The separation of students in what we call South Alice from a neighborhood school exists regardless of quadrant analyses or the quadrant geography. The same for the north side. We have 4 schools that are on the small side and have interesting opportunities and do serve as community assets up there. And the dynamic there and our recommendation to explore programming, particularly for early childhood, and considering those 4 schools as a collective resource, again, also not changed by the quadrant layout. So we can shift it back into conventional mode, of 4 high schools. We would just need time to do that.
Ananda, do you want to jump in?
Were you done, Kate? Nikki? Thank you, Kate. Just a couple of mentions, because I think what I heard in a retreat is that sometimes one of us share their opinion or their thinking, and then if nobody else says anything, it almost is an agreement.
Right, and I don't want that.
I don't want to completely disagree with Nikki, but I just want to offer, another perspective.
Cool.
And I'll start with the quadrants, because to me it was really helpful. In particular, the South Alice, which is the neighborhood that I reside, which is a neighborhood, excuse me, is a neighborhood that's often neglected by previous plans. So it was a great view to highlight, in particular, the South Alice, the North Side schools, and the upcoming growth in the West. So I think also as it relates to what is going to be marketed to the community. So that's what I'd be more concerned is, the quadrants right now is, to me, as I read, is like a technical term to provide a more deeper analysis. I'm being more concerned to like what is the communication to the community. I don't expect folks to understand the quadrants.
Right.
So I think that's where I wanted to offer this balance. I wanted to speak to a couple of things because I liked, Chad, what you mentioned around the $2 a year is the optimal for maintenance. I'm curious to how, and doesn't need to respond now, but what given that we might be spending $5 because we are, the deferred maintenance plus, updates and plus whatever else, what would that look like mathematically per high school? And just to kind of give an idea, I don't know, does that clear what I'm trying to go? So $2 a year is optimal.
$2 a square foot per year.
I'm
Yep.
sorry, $2 a square foot per year is the optimal. What is the calculation current based on, so is, when you say $2, is it just in maintenance?
Yeah, right now we're just over $1 a square foot.
Right.
Yep.
So the new plan, what is that markup? I guess that's what I'm asking. Is that clear? I can ask in a
Are
different
you
way.
asking for how much per square foot we're paying to renovate the spaces?
Yes.
All right, I could, that's,
Yeah.
I can get you that, maybe by the end of the meeting,
Yes,
maybe Doug
based
and
on
Ken
whatever
can help.
parameter it's used.
That's simply
Yeah.
the square footage of East High School divided by $75 million.
Okay.
My
Okay.
guess is it's gonna be in the neighborhood of $100 a square foot, at least. Yeah,
So I think that is a good, because you did the
Yeah,
math,
so-
right? That's the math you were
so-
doing?
So, so typically, new construction now is as much as $250 to $350 a square foot.
Okay.
That's what Verona's paying for theirs.
Yeah.
Rehab's usually about half of that, remodel jobs.
Okay.
So that's just my ballpark guessing what we're putting in. Doug's saying yes, so about $100 a square foot.
Okay.
So that's a different, really a different calculation because this is a complete rehab, right?
Right.
One thing to also remember in my view, one of the big benefits of the high school plan is these are our 4 biggest plants and take for sure a third to more of the annual money it takes for me to maintain schools to maintain their old infrastructure. And once they have an overhaul, it would actually allow us
Yeah.
the remaining maintenance money in my budget to turn it and point it towards the rest of the sites in the district because we'd be kind of good to go on the high
Yeah.
schools for a little bit. Not that we would ever want to lose track of,
Right.
maintaining our sites at an appropriate level when it comes to budgeting, but the high schools would kind of be good to go. In many ways, Olson's starting to show its age, but we don't put a lot of money into Olson because it's a
Because the
relatively
new-
new site.
Right.
Our high schools would feel like that once they were completely redone.
What are you going to add?
I was just going to add, the additional investments start to make the high schools more efficient too, when you think about the energy loss and the lights and the windows. So they just become more efficient to run as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's really helpful. I'm trying to scaffold learning for the community, and I
Yeah.
have a couple of other things, if I may. One is any thoughts, because I know we're doing the survey and people are already doing a lot of input, but I'm curious to a possibility of some sort of a stakeholder, very targeted, focus group to review. I know you sometimes run, Jen, things with Shrek, for example. or your special ed folks. So, you know, really targeted groups, not just open to anybody, like just recommendations. Because I'm also thinking like people with some expertise or some different lenses that can kind of cover some of the blind spots. So
I gotta agree with that.
I'll leave that in here. And then the last thing was around the buckets of work. I really appreciated how it's laid out. I know some folks have also shared like the high school as a priority. I agree completely. But I feel like I hear that every year there's a set of priority and then buckets of work that gets neglected. So I am in full support of that. I am curious about maybe exploring, for example, the changes to school district boundaries, because I think that has caused a little bit of confusion. What is the professional development activity? I think I know intuitively what it is. And I think those are the two ones that I feel like people can misinterpret.
And Ananda's referencing that slide with
The
the four
buckets.
big work streams on it, just so you're aware. So some of those sub boxes that maybe need a little more explanation at some point.
Okay, can I speak to a couple of those? So that on the
It's up to the chair.
Are you okay with that? Yeah. So on the boundary side, we can continue to have boundary discussions. I think you have, and Andrew I can certainly pass the baton here, both internal boundaries inside our district, which can be difficult sometimes if you're attempting to move boundaries for certain reasons, and then also our just kind of ongoing work with the neighboring districts. So those are the two buckets we speak to in the plan, but we can see if we can give you some more details there. The professional development activity, I believe the main thing we want to get to there is we're spending a lot of money for off-site professional development for our adults in the district, and we think there could be a win-win scenario if we own something that our own staff could utilize and potentially we could rent to the community.
And I can add that the professional development needs, we have them pretty regularly. We have to shop around for a space big enough with sufficient parking and services to host those. A facility that looks good for professional development opportunities like that also looks good for big testing. Advanced placement testing comes to mind. We're probably going to see not only our participation of advanced testing increase as it has in the last few years, but also the cost per student to be hosted at a place like Alliant is also likely to go up. So keep in mind that one can serve two functions. Yeah. And on the boundaries, a lot of conversation in the plan itself is driven by some case studies. So Allied is an example. We have kind of a funny little border, both for the city and for the school district. It is the Verona School District. It is Fitchburg City. It's City of Madison, Madison Schools. And it's an opportunity for us to get together across borders and really try to figure out what's the best way to serve those students and families. And similar to the Spirit of the Quads, when we put those together just as a thought container, the idea of our district boundaries standing in the way of families, even if unintentionally, was something we wanted to put aside. So we called that out as an opportunity to engage other districts. And then there's also further west then, it's kind of crazy quilt of different school districts within our boundaries, islands, and investigating what makes the most sense from a taxation standpoint, from a services standpoint, communication, transportation, those kinds of things is really what we're after, to just kind of ignore those or suspend current condition and find the best solution for those areas.
And lastly, I just wanted to thank you all because I think there is so many stones that got lifted up that have been hidden in years past. So I really appreciate it. I mean, some of those things that are now being lifted up, I've been hearing for 10 years. Yeah. So I really do not want it to wait another 10 years for those, for those things to come up. So I appreciate the plan and the soundness and the explanations. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
So I want to echo all the thanks. I really appreciate this report to the board and this update and all of the work you've put into it. In particular, the very lengthy list of links and resources that you provided us is invaluable for as a board making these decisions. Thank you so much for putting those all in one place. With that said, I'm still struggling with the notion of this not as an update or a report, but as a strategic plan for moving forward. We can talk about it as a guidance document, but when you write a plan, the idea is that you're going to do the stuff that's in your plan. And I don't feel like the ideas in this plan have been analyzed closely enough. I don't feel like they're strategic enough for us to do them. With that said, I fully support moving ahead with the referendum for our 4 comprehensive high schools. I think we have to do that. We don't have time to put that off. But I don't support passing this plan as a facilities plan at this point in time. Policy 1535 doesn't say we have to pass this plan in any specific time frame. I don't think we have to pass this plan to pass the referendum. I think we have to have a vision for the referendum, and I would really like to see us focus our efforts on the referendum and the 4 high schools without passing this entire plan. And even if there's flexibility within this plan to do things differently, we're still committing ourselves to do the things that are written in here without, I think, analysis and strategic thought behind the things that are in here. Some specific thoughts. I share the concerns about Doyle that Nikki raised. I think the optics of including, moving the Doyle buildings, in particular because we feel like the facilities aren't good enough and the parking isn't good enough for administration, it doesn't look good when we have elementary schools with D grades and high schools that are crumbling. That's where our focus needs to be. $5 to $15 million for this piece of property actually isn't that much money. It's going to probably pay to move the administration building. I don't think it's going to give us much more to work with. And I suppose if the market value falls, it might make it even harder to move the administration building, but I think it needs to be out of the plan. I'm concerned about pretty concretely putting the move of Capitol High into the Hoyt neighborhood in this plan without actually talking to the Hoyt neighborhood first about what it means to convert that building from MSCR to an actual working school. I think we also need to look at other options for Capitol High. Right now, East High is at about 60% of capacity. I think the projections are it will go up to 65% with growth. We have a lot of seats at East High that aren't being used, and that could be another possible location for Capitol High. I think we need to broaden that to, we have a problem, we need to solve it, we need to stop paying rent, let's look at our options. But let's not commit to Hoyt in a plan when we haven't actually talked to the Hoyt neighborhood. When it comes to learning spaces, not much in this plan at all, a little bit more in the PowerPoint. We need to get away from jargon and actually get strategic about what our vision is for learning down the road in MMSD. When we just talk about 21st century learning, what does that mean? What does that look like? What is that? We actually, I think, need to get very strategic about what learning will look like in MMSD in the next 25, 30 years and what our spaces need to be to reflect that vision. That's the kind of strategic thinking I would actually like to see in our plan when we finally pass it. The whole section on school capacity and neighborhood schools, I agree that the lines of the quadrants don't make sense to me because as a board, we're going to have to, especially if we're building new schools, we are going to have to make difficult decisions about school boundaries. There's no getting around it. And having a plan that actually even separates Lapham and Marquette into 2 different quadrants when they're paired schools makes that really hard. I would like to see a plan where we can actually work from the plan to think about boundaries and think about innovative uses for underutilized buildings within the parameters of what our boundary lines currently look like and what they might look like down the road. I know those are hard decisions, and I know nobody likes to talk about boundary changes, but if we're going to build new schools, it's going to happen. I think we need stronger language around prioritizing our existing schools. The Vanderwall report on projected growth in the district points out that most of the growth we're going to experience is on the periphery, where we're expecting new building, and actually most of the infill development that's going on within the city is potentially going to decrease enrollment because we're looking at more apartments, and those tend not to have families in them. And at the same time, if we're putting all our money into schools on the outskirts of town that prioritize new development, we're not actually taking an equity approach. I really feel like this plan needs to talk about existing buildings and making them our top priority. There are also just some really weird numbers getting batted about. I know that enrollment at Crestwood, where my kids went to school, was 100 students higher 7 or 8 years ago than it is right now, and yet we're being told our current enrollment is at 96% of capacity, which doesn't make any sense to me. So I'm not, maybe the addition of 4K, there's like a 4K classroom now that wasn't there 7 or 8 years ago, but that doesn't seem to account for 100 kids. So I think we need to take a closer look at these numbers and these projections and what's really happening. I know that the Vanderwall projections for the growth in the Memorial area, it's just a short period of time, but it's not happening yet. So let's be thoughtful about this. I think we absolutely need to be strategic about 4K expansion in MMSD, whether that means absorbing more of what's at private schools right now and also going full day 4K and maybe even starting 3K if we ever get funding from the state from that, and what that means for our buildings. And finally, the decisions about Alice, which I know are not made in this report, and I'm glad for that. I'm glad we have the flexibility to think about this going down the road. Alice Elementary serves some of our most vulnerable students right now. It has one of the higher populations of Black students in the district. It's crumbling. It's a mess. And yet I feel like the discussion of what to do in South Alice is mostly about we need a home for Nuestro Mundo and not what do we do, in the actual plan. We need to talk more about what we do for our most vulnerable kids who are at Alice. And it could go either way. Either we really sink some money. If we're going to build a new charter school in South Madison for Nuestro Mundo, we equitably need to sink money into the existing Alice building, I think, to make sure the kids who are at Alice have a good facility. We have some amazing staff at Alice who are doing incredible work, and I just want to make sure that they have a facility there that allows them to do that work. The science room at Alice is amazing. We have a nurse at Alice who's doing some really progressive stuff with wellness and equity. And so my thought on the Nuestro Mundo Alice thing is we need to talk about the needs of both student populations, however the decision turns out.
In the ninth.
Do you guys want to make any comments? And then I want to jump in.
Sorry about that.
No,
Always forget that part.
Absolutely. I just was going to give these guys an opportunity to respond to Chris first.
Yeah,
Oh,
can I?
here,
can I speak to that?
here.
And I'm sorry, I don't want to jump in, I can't see you.
Go for it.
Do you want to say anything?
So I just want to make sure that I'm hearing what Chris is saying concretely, because I found that overall to be slightly confusing. So I'm hearing that the emphasis should be on the high school, but not necessarily on moving Capitol High into a school building, that being one of the high schools. I heard that maybe the emphasis in elementary school needs to shift beyond Nuestro Mundo, but that we don't actually, that Chris is thinking we don't actually want to focus on elementary. And then I also heard an emphasis on full day 4K and possibly, 3K, but that again seems to conflict with the idea that the emphasis area of the referendum would be the 4 high schools. The other thing I wanted to speak to very specifically in terms of Capitol High, because I visited Capitol High on several occasions and I've had students who attended both sites at Capitol High, is that I think the part of the reason you're looking at Hoyt for Capitol High is that it is an alternative school. And so students are leaving their high school to attend Capitol High because of harassment or because of, needing to be in a smaller or more contained environment with a slightly different structure. That placing that actual school in East High School goes against that idea. And so I think there was a lot of complexity in what Chris was just saying, but for me there were a couple ideas that seemed to contradict one another.
Yeah, Chris, why don't you respond, and then I'd like to maybe I haven't spoken yet, I'd like to make a comment, and Anika would as well, so.
I'll just give a really quick response to that. I apologize for confusion. I think the short version of what I was saying was that we can move forward on the referendum, which right now mostly targets our comprehensive high schools, as well as the issues in South Alice, without actually passing a plan for the entire district. Hoyt may actually be the best location for Capitol High. I'm just saying let's talk to the community more and look at our options before we put it in a plan and pass it. And
So Chris, I'm really sorry, but when you spoke about this the first time, I didn't think you were talking about the community in general. I thought you were talking about the neighborhood that immediately surrounds Hoyt.
Yep.
I thought you were saying, hey, if we want to move kids who attend this school from around the district into the Hoyt neighborhood, we should let that immediate community that surrounds that school weigh in on it. Are you saying that you want the immediate community of Hoyt to weigh in, or are you saying that you want the entirety of the community to weigh in?
both. The immediate Hoyt community should have a say in the use of that building. Likewise, we should also be able to talk to them about the advantages possibly of moving Capitol High into that building. And, you know, we need to have meetings there to talk about the plan and get buy-in, if buy-in is the most important thing.
I just want to emphasize that that's a very different thing than saying we need to talk to the kids and teachers who attend Capitol High right now and talk to them about what they need. So I'm like, without getting too back and forth here, I just really want to make sure I understand that your area of concern and emphasis is the homeowners around Hoyt, not necessarily the students attending Capitol High or the teachers who are working in these facilities that are not necessarily schools.
I don't think it's an either or, Ollie. It's both. We need to talk to everybody.
Oh, okay.
But we need to make sure that the taxpayers who are going to fund this referendum do have some buy-in and some say in
All right.
what we're doing and where we're headed.
I would love to offer Anika an opportunity to speak. She's been waiting patiently.
Yes.
I just wanted to talk about like community engagement, especially when it comes to like students and teachers, because I have like read in the plan how you guys are planning on having like a survey and like having student focus groups. But a lot of the time with like surveys and student focus groups is that the only people that participate are the people who are like already interested in like paying attention. So like figuring out, I guess, maybe a more effective way of reaching to like non-traditional learners, because everyone's experience in schools are different. Like some people might spend more time in like the arts sector or like other areas of the school that might not like get addressed by some of the students who traditionally opt into those like surveys and focus groups. So like figuring out maybe a way, like whether it just means like walking into class and talking to students, or just figuring out a like more constructive way of like addressing all the student body.
I think that's a really good question, and we're going to get into exactly that topic as soon as we wrap up this initial chunk of the presentation. We'd love to get more of your ideas.
So, let me maybe jump in. I hear us talking about two separate things, and I want to separate them, and I think it might be worthwhile separating them formally. The one is the referendum, which will address our 4 comprehensive high schools and potentially an Alice Nuestro South Madison school, elementary school.
And an alternative.
So that is timely. It is pressing. It is a referendum that we aspire to pass in 2020. And need to do a lot of work for. There's been a lot of really good thinking done. The second thing that we're talking about is this plan, which is a living document and which really tries to frame out all of our facilities boundary needs. And I think we're getting confused between the two of them. And I maybe to some earlier comments on public confusion around the referendum, I don't think we need anything that makes this more complicated than it already is. And so I would strongly suggest that we limit this document that we pass to what ties 1-to-1 with the referendum right now, so that we can keep our team focused on what is pressing and urgent while we continue to explore other topics. Again, my opinion, but I just wanted to name that confusion here. And I think that we don't necessarily need to be burning your hours on some of the exploratory questions about paired schools, et cetera, where growth is going to be 15 years from now. Right now, we need you focused on our 4 schools, on Capitol High, right? That we need a lot of focus right there, right now. So I'm not sure we benefit from these other topics. So let me just say that, and I have a few other comments I'd like to make on both pieces, but Kelly, you looked like you wanted to say something.
Let's pause, say more,
Okay.
and I think we all would love to have that conversation.
So, I mean, maybe just to start there, let me start with the first topic, which is the referendum. I mean, you guys know I am very strongly supportive of us investing in our schools. I think Madison needs to bring our high schools into the 21st century, maybe even the 22nd century. We have an incredible asset in our community, in our location. And if we want to continue to attract people to the city of Madison to be employees, to work at the university, to work at Epic, to grow the city, we have to offer the best school district around. We just have to. Like, there's no option there, right? Like, we have to be the district of choice within 30 miles. When we're not, none of us and the entire city starts to go a different direction, right? So for me, this referendum is one of the linchpins to doing that, and I would go farther. I think the thinking that's been done, you guys have done excellent thinking. I do think that we're holding back in terms of truly, if we want it, like we talk about innovation, we're talking about exploring. We have so many assets here that we haven't thought that creatively about yet, namely arts, university facilities. We're a small city, right? Like what does it start to look at? We haven't started talking about the Madison South Campus and how that plays into all of these facilities. Do we need transit hubs? Like, I don't know. I'm naming that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We haven't done a referendum of this nature or of an investment of this nature in 50 years. I think it's reasonable to think that maybe we don't for another 50 years. And if we want the impact we're making right now to still be attractive in 30, 50 years, I think we need to think a little bigger. So for me, I would go farther. I would invest more in our high schools, including our alternative high schools. I think our alternative high schools are a huge key to the future in terms of providing differentiated educational opportunities. I think in the future, it's likely we will want to explore arts-focused education or other more deeply experiential education in a way that different physical facilities enables. So I commend what's been done. I would use it as a foundation and keep pushing and pick one or two things that are really, truly kind of, reflective of something that we might want to shout to the rooftops about, right? So that's just for me on the referendum piece. I think we're going in the right direction. I think we need to keep going. Let me talk about the plan. So the plan talks about more, right? So for me, the quadrants are incredibly challenging because they limit thinking around feeder pools in a way that is tough. So every one of the paired schools is in different quadrants, I think. And there are a number of schools that are significantly sub-capacity right now. We have, I think, 4 schools that are sub-200. We talk about trying to make our maintenance dollars go farther, but we have a lot of small schools. And so for me, the elementary plan is one that does need to talk about boundaries. It does need to talk about the number of schools we have. And think maybe, again, more creatively around K through 8, recombining some of our paired schools, et cetera, et cetera. There's, I think, more creativity that we need there. I don't think our enrollments support new schools in almost all cases. But I don't think that's a pressing topic either for this year. I think we have a lot of pressing topics this year, and high schools and hiring a new superintendent are the 2 pressing topics, and we all need to keep our eye on that ball. So I think there's a lot of exploratory learning that we're going to get from our feedback process that we can learn and pick up the elementary question next year. That's fine, right? It's incredibly complex. We have a lot of opportunity to unlock with potentially 3K, 4K, again, alternatives, et cetera. It's not a pressing question right now for me. So those would be kind of my 2 big topics. And very small comment that I would very much support private funding exploration as well, just to make sure that we've got all of our stakeholders in the city engaged and supportive. We've got a lot of support for public education in the city. Let's leverage it. So.
Can I just say one question?
Please.
Well, one statement. I want to go on what Ananda said on encouraging different people on the focus groups that not normally, for example, before we do the referendum on East High School, could we please have someone who's possibly visually impaired to be on the panel, because it's one of the darkest schools. When I was losing my vision, it was one of the darkest and most difficult buildings to get around physically. And I think we can see it from a standpoint that someone who doesn't have those disabilities may not.
Oh, I think that's an excellent point, Nikki. Would it be all right if I chimed in on
Yeah,
on this
please.
too?
And then Ananda, and then
why
maybe
don't you go first?
Thank you. So I just wanted to comment, because I'm the only board member that currently that has actually worked at Doyle. And also, when we talk about the vulnerable children that live in the South Alice, we're talking about my child. So I want to just speak to both of those things from a first-person perspective. This city is flagged with a lot of us versus them, and I will interrupt consistently as much as I can when I hear subtones of that. I don't think it was your intention, Chris, or it's the intention of anyone on the board, but I will interrupt. I think that when we talk about Doyle, we talk about, again, when I worked at Doyle, I definitely felt that, this distrust with the schools. But when we think about hiring a really well-qualified superintendent, we need to think about where this person is going to work and provide, working conditions and a bathroom that person can have actually privacy, which is something that I did not have when I worked here because the ways our bathroom stalls were set up was very problematic as a woman. So that I'm just gonna give you that as an example. Doyle staff are supposed to be supporting and do support our teachers and do support our students and our families. So I think that talking about Doyle staff, as a different group than when we talk about our school staff, I think that's very problematic. We do need to provide everyone with dignified workspaces, and that includes Doyle staff, especially if we are committed to continue to recruit and hire and retain staff of color, in the administration. Around Nostro Mundo, again, this overtone about Spanish-speaking families and Black families that comprise the Alice Atenas area, which mostly are my neighbors, find it problematic when we talk about this community in the way of us versus them. I think also what Nostro Mundo School needs, providing Nostro Mundo what they need should not be equal to what Alice needs. Alice needs are Alice needs. Like Lapin's needs are Lapin's needs, and Chavez needs are just Chavez needs. Comparing them or speaking to them in the same sense, it's not equity, it's equality. So I just wanted to say that really clearly. I'm the one that is actually muddying this conversation because I find it to be really important. The Nostro Mundo is actually closer to where the building is closer to the Spanish-speaking families that live in that South Alice family, especially because in order for that program to be successful, you need half of that population to be native Spanish speakers. And that program has largely benefit mostly non-Spanish speaking families that live in the Far East Side area. So I think it is an equitable issue, and that's why I'm raising and really speaking to that. That building, I was also the person that negotiated a lot of the contract when I was a Nostro Mundo parent, and I was also on the board of Nostro Mundo with administration at that time. I think we missed an opportunity to advocate for a plan because the building that we are now, the building that Nostro Mundo is at now at Monona was supposed to be a temporary fix, and that temporary is now lasting 10 years. And has not ameliorated the issues that the community have as far as being far from the geographic area and the accessibility for parents. So I think that it's a larger comprehensive conversation that has not started now. And I'd love to talk to you more about that. And the last thing around Hoyt, I heard the us versus them and that. I do agree that not just Hoyt, but just everything else, it needs to have community input, and that's why I brought up the targeted, hearing from students, hearing from folks that have multiple abilities, hearing from the teachers that they're going to be directly impacted by whatever change. I don't agree with just asking Hoyt neighborhood alone what they think. Because I think that this will foster this sort of this us versus them. We don't want those people in our neighborhood, and that is something that I'm really committed to. And that's one of the reasons that I ran for office. And I'm really committed to interrupting this type of microaggressions that
often unintentionally happen.
Can I take a stab at summarizing some of what we just heard for you and saying it out loud? We have 5 folks, but I know Ali's not here, so like, let me try, and if we get it wrong, just say so. I heard some alignment in terms of discomfort in pieces of this plan, or at least the comprehensiveness of this plan, in the sense that it will be directing work. And I don't know what the best way for you guys to, if you heard the same thing, or if you, how you want to approach that, I guess. Let me just stop on the first one. Just outside of referendum, right? Like, again, let's split these two things. I'm hearing a lot of alignment on where we're going referendum-wise.
Kate, I want you to get back to your summary.
2 things.
But this might help too. I
Okay.
appreciate wanting to separate the two apart because we've been struggling with that as well.
Yeah.
And maybe just to bring a little historical knowledge into the room. To Chad's earlier point, we haven't had a long-range facilities plan ever. We've had a couple of reports over decades that were helpful bits of information, but not comprehensive. When we started this journey, whenever that was, 5 years ago or so, we had some big preliminary discussions with the board about what it is that we wanted to create. And we actually made a decision not to have a big comprehensive long-range facilities plan, like kind of in a more traditional sense. And I know Chris had mentioned the Austin plan as an example. We actually looked at it back around the time it was released as a model for what we might do. What we decided at that time was to create a set of resources so that we could get ourselves onto a referendum cycle to do the kind of exciting work that we all want to do without ever feeling locked into any specific projects that were put on paper at any point in time. We wanted a set of really good information to make great decisions together, which is what we did, right? We kind of created this major resource. Last year, when we went and updated facilities policy, it was decided by the board at that time that we should create a facilities plan. But I think, again, in like kind of the original spirit of what we were tasked to do over all these years, we had to make sense out of that. Like, what does that mean right now? What does a facilities plan mean for this district and the way we've been trying to lead? So we decided, to Chad's earlier point, to create more of a guidance document that had all these resources embedded in it, right? So as to guide our decision making, but not to plan every step. So I just want you to know that we can relate to you. This discussion feels like one we've been having too, like trying to make sense about what is this plan? How does it help us? How does it feel constraining, actually, in some ways, to have this plan? So we've done the very best we could do to use it in a way that we think is potentially useful. I think where we are, and I'm curious if there's alignment on this at all, is that we could make some of the updates to that existing plan based on what we heard tonight. The quadrant idea, for is an example, was a construct, right? We decided to use it so as to overlay it and test some assumptions. If we only looked at it based on the feeder patterns, right, we might just fall into some of the same assumptions and traps. We needed to, it's a thought experiment, right, to change the lines and think differently. So we were happy to go back and put it back into the feeder patterns. Maybe another problem will emerge, right? That's interesting. We don't think so, but we're fine with making some of those adjustments. If we were to approve the plan with some of those adjustments in August, we would need you to understand that it is truly a guidance document, right? It is not, we think it's strategic, but it doesn't get into the level of detail, right, that some of these other long-range facilities plans do. That just wasn't how we designed it. So you could approve it, let's say a month from now, right, in August, but I think really it goes into the background, right? It just becomes the guidance document, and now we are full into referendum mode starting in September and moving forward. I think that would be our preference, to tell you the truth, because we don't want to spend a ton more time on this guidance document, because that's what, this conversation is proof that that's not where our energy and interest
It's
is
not.
right now. We
No.
want to work on the referendum. I think
Yep.
we all want to. The other option is to put the referendum first and put this guidance document on the back burner. It stays draft, right? We put it on a shelf.
It makes our website a whole lot better with the work we did.
There you go.
Yeah.
Put it on the website. It's still in draft form. And when we are ready, maybe it's a year from now, maybe it's after the referendum has passed even, right? We come back to this and think, okay, let's go big picture again. Where are we going next as a school system, right? That might be another way to go. But help us, because we're not quite sure what to do either. And we want to, mainly we want to support you in making great decisions on
I think,
facilities.
I had Kate had said I could go. I think that putting the referendum first and putting it in the background, one, it shows us, our website, that we've thought about the future. We're still thinking about the future, but we're going to focus on the current referendum. Two, it prevents the confusion on a lot of things. Are they doing this? Are they not doing this? And it might stop people from having confusion regarding some of the issues with the referendum. I don't want to create more work for anyone. Basically, face it, you guys work hard enough as is. I don't want to create more than that. I think putting something out, saying the referendum first, and then just putting the rest on the back burner, but out there, so people who want the information have the right to get the information. But that's just me.
I hear the appeal of, so referendums are confusing and complicated, so I feel like, whether or not we move forward in a plan, there is a lot of confusion. I also think that the giving names to buckets of work and line streams actually helps in the sense of the folks that say, like, what about my school? Right? So, yeah, your school is part of, every organization needs to have a long term, like a long strategic plan. And that's what when I hear, this is what I see. This is a long, we could visually, make just, different ways to say, like, this is actually the elevated work to kind of highlight the referendum, but I hate to lose also this opportunity to say, we had the referendum, but we also are making, like, the standing or North Star to move towards, so people are not creating resentment that something's not happening to their school or to their attendance area or to their community. So that's my...
Ali, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I think when I think about a lot of what is within this current plan, it's very easy for me to reference the idea that justice delayed is justice denied. I think a lot of what this plan prioritizes is our facilities that need the most work and our young people that need the greatest investment. And so I think prioritizing Ellis and prioritizing Nuestro Mundo and having, an expansive relationship with the possibilities moving forward allows for us to dwell in possibility and really take, an inventory of where we are right now as a district in a really realistic way. And I think it's a very thoughtful plan. And I think it is a plan that's been responsive to the community. I think it not only looks at the immediate community that surrounds buildings, but it also looks at, the teachers and students who are in facilities right now that aren't meeting their needs. And I think being committed to reconciling that is our job. And so I think that this is a strategic approach. I think it's a plan that moves us forward and pushes us to have a very complex conversation. And I think that we, can pass this plan and rise to the occasion of being critical of it and picking, components as we move forward. So I feel confident in the work that's been done and where it takes us.
May I issue just a quick clarification?
Here, can Chris
sorry,
jump in?
Kate. Chris, I apologize. I'm off tonight. Apologize.
I personally like the idea of putting our focus right now on the 4 comprehensive high schools, alternative high school programs, and the South Madison solution, because I think those are the most pressing problems we face, and I think those touch almost every family in MMSD, if not now, down the road, because almost everybody's going to end up in a comprehensive high school or an alternative high school program. So it's a good way to get buy-in from a wide swath of the community for a vision that we have without passing the entire plan, which I feel like could be better. But at the same time, I don't think we should put a whole lot of time into it right now because we need to pass the referendum. That's where our energy and our focus should be. Ananda, I really appreciate your challenging me on my comments on South Madison. I just wanted to add that I think I wasn't clear enough that I think if we're going to put money in the referendum to put a new building in South Madison to take care of some of the needs, I think the kids in South Madison who still go to Alice, whoever those kids are, deserve an equally great building. And so I would just accelerate the investments in the Alice building to accompany investments in a new school, so all the kids in that neighborhood get to go to a great school that's refreshed.
She basically took what I was going to say with one exception, which is I don't want to throw out the work that you've done. It's too good work to throw out, and that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we still include it on the website and other parts, and even this is currently a draft of what we're considering for the long-range facilities. But I think the South Madison, especially Alice New West Raimondo, and the referendum are the two most important things we're facing.
Can we pass section 1 essentially, but add to it? I mean, it's essentially that. It's the 4 high schools, it's Hoyt. We would need to pull forward the Alice Nuestro Mundo discussion, but would that be a viable path here that would make this simple without a lot of work for you guys?
The breakout section 1, is it, I guess I would ask why. Why do we think we need to vote on it?
Yeah.
If we're breaking
Why
out a
even
piece
bother?
of it. Because, and I'm very interested in kind of wrapping this up. I actually think the conversation we're going to have around the community input plan, that Andrew's going to specifically say, here's what we're seeking input on, here's who we think, or the methodology we think we'll use, with you guys saying, that sounds like a great plan, tweak it this way. You're telling us to go get feedback on 2020, regardless of the plan. Breaking off a chunk. Yeah.
I'd rather just shelve it.
Because you guys are gonna vote on referendum language.
That's fine.
In the coming months as it is.
I do like Nikki's idea of putting it on the website.
I
think that's right.
The data should be used.
That's a decision, I think.
I think Ananda would love, let's just clarify what we might be deciding.
We're deciding that we are not going to vote on this in August, this document, right? That these guys are going to push forward with the community engagement plan focused on referendum 2020, which we're going to talk about next.
And this document can still be posted on the website. It can still serve as this guidance until when we together decide on when to come back to this facilities plan, this one, but it may not be for quite some time. It might be after the referendum is passed, right? That there's no urgency about getting this finalized. We have a pretty good sense of where we want to go. The energy is on getting the referendum package.
So before we
squared away.
move into the community engagement, I just want to make sure that there is no specific feedback on pieces of the high school, Capitol High, West Raimondo discussion that we didn't summarize that these guys need to take away. Like, that's the pressing topic right now.
Yeah, so here, we were just talking here, what I think we're going to do, because we heard enough feedback on it, I think we'll work with Andrew's team over the coming months. We won't have to fast track it since this is going to be on the shelf for a little bit, but take another run at, instead of doing quadrants, doing attendance areas, rerun all of our assumptions and our recommendations, and we'd still keep a draft stamp on the plan, but we would update the plan on our website and share it with all of you for feedback. And then I think, just like you said, full steam ahead to 2020, and this is continues to be an amazing resource. Ananda, I appreciate what you continue to say. Everyone is going to want to know, where am I in this plan? And if I have a second grader in an elementary school, we're not calling out specifically in 2020. We need this resource on our website so families know we have a comprehensive look at the district. Even though, I don't think anyone in here is interested in a 4-3 vote because we included Doyle or we didn't in a plan. That's not what we want to talk about right now.
No.
We want to talk about 2020.
Okay.
Right?
All right. Let's talk about community
And
engagement.
is Ali good with that? I don't know if I heard her voice.
Ali, are you good with that approach?
Yes.
Thanks.
Hello?
Yeah, you're
Yep,
good.
we gotcha.
All right, let's talk about community engagement.
Okay.
All right. Now that we are firmly grounded in referendum November 2020 territory,
Yeah.
this makes some of this a little bit easier. So we know that we're not talking about input on a whole plan. We know that we're talking about gathering input and engaging our community around a November 2020 referendum. So that really does help. So the purpose of this is to review our input plan, check against a shared vision that we're going to create together here, and see what changes we may need to an input plan, provide you with an updated version, and then go do that plan. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So,
But that's my opinion. I'm sorry, I have a bad habit of just saying that automatically, so.
It's all good. Keep
that's,
going.
that's quite all right. We're actually going to suspend a lot of rules here on this slide. So, I'm.
Yeah,
so
I
we're-
probably do.
So we're gonna do something fresh here. We're gonna mix this up a little bit. So what I'm going to propose is something that makes our work group time together look maybe a little bit more like a work group, right? And maybe a
gosh.
little bit more like a retreat, or maybe
Do we have
even
to
something
draw?
creative. Yeah, why not? We're gonna try exercising both sides of the brain today. So we got a short protocol here. We're going to start with the nonverbal. So each board member has an 11 by 17 piece of paper. We went big on this. And a Sharpie. And as you're working, I'll come by with various colors of markers if you'd like to spice things up a little bit. So what we found is using this as a starting point kind of gets some personal reflection together. You don't have to make a masterpiece. You don't have to describe it in great detail, but the idea is just to process on your own for a few minutes. After that, we'll share with each other in small groups, try to get those creative juices flowing back on the verbal side of the brain, and then share out of the group and see what our shared vision looks like. So questions on that protocol before I get us started for about 10 minutes start to finish. All right. Our 3 minutes
You're
for the
having fun
first
with this,
phase
aren't
starts
you?
now. All right.
I'm going Jackson Pollock. No, I can draw. I don't like it. I can do it.
Oh my gosh. Yours. That's all good. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see, this one looks best to me.
All right. So what might an equitable community input process look like? Visualizing that input process. take another minute or so to finish your drawing. Using words when needed, but trying to be as visual as possible, spark some ideas. All right, I'm sensing some of the creative energy is finally coming to a close. The invitation now, and this works out pretty well, in the room because we're an even number, just sitting next to the person you're with, just describe your drawing. Take about a minute or so, maybe 2 per person, and just describe what it is. Just tell the story. Ali, I apologize. Hoping you're drawing and reflecting on your own. And please contribute later, please. Please.
Thank you so much for the consideration.
This is a wheelchair. I want it by video and by computer as well as live, so that we get equity, not just equality. I want to focus on equitable solutions for everyone, not then what pamphlets in multiple languages. And that's about as good as I can.
Cool.
Now,
my drawing was kind of an afterthought. I would really like to have a team inclusive of instructional and design folks and students that visit surrounding schools. So it's not just us thinking about what we want, but
this is it's a wheelchair. It's supposed to be also to be accessible, both video, audio, pamphlets, multiple languages.
Love it.
Accessible building.
Very.
And she was explaining her project, which I really like.
this is Madison. This is a lake. And I would really love to visit some schools. I think it would serve us really well as a group.
The other thing we have to do in the next couple months, I know things have been crazy. We have to work to our own schools. We need to go. I would love to do that.
I mean, I think I'd love to do it, but I also think like a broader team with students and with at least someone or people from the team on instructional design to actually go look at some of the surrounding schools. Some of the folks from the Black Excellence Coalition, maybe just like there's a group of people. I would like to go, but I think it's just we're a little bit like we're reacting to an architect's vision right now and the competitive dynamics.
I took pictures of all 50 if you want to see them.
Yeah, but have you been to like the new Sun Prairie, the new Middleton? I swim in Middleton sometimes, and that high school is.
I've been to Sun Prairie once for a basketball tournament.
So I just think that would be helpful to really put it in context.
Yeah,
so,
that makes
some
sense.
of the surrounding districts.
So we hear a lot about that, and that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
I appreciate the work of the quadrant. I think that was going to. I already had both students.
Yeah. No, it's no, exactly. It just will scare people. I'm sure.
Did you both have a chance to describe?
Yeah. We did, yeah.
Thank you.
That kind of worries when
Oh yeah. No, I think
the city education committee wants to know who's on what committee. Because they can't
Gloria's working on it.
Okay. They had to cancel the meeting because they don't know who's on it.
Yeah, I don't know, Barb, have you reached out on the city education committee yet? For whoever's going to be, I don't know, for the education committee at the city, who we're going to put there? Okay. Because Nikki was on it, and it sounds like they're reaching out to her to find out who the people are, so.
I'm talking to them also, Nikki.
Oh, okay.
At the same time, so let me.
Beautiful.
All right, you guys
got
can,
the
you guys
email
can close
from
the
that.
Great.
Oh, here.
All right. So I'm now the guy who has to turn off the creative and fun flowing conversations and just ask, so what came up for you? You had some time to reflect on your own, you had some time to exchange, some time to verbalize. So just what came up for you? I'd like to hear from each of you. Nikki.
I liked her, Kate's vision on the broader, of looking at the broader community and each part. I think that's very important to include all parts on that. With mine, it was, by the way, I will not get an A in art, but I like doing it. I enjoy drawing. I'm just not great at it. But mine is more on the accessibility, like having things streamed, having things online as much as possible for those who can't get there. That when there's information, well, the one thing we're really, really good at is having information in multiple languages, which I like. And just to have as many people at the table who wouldn't always be there and think, oh, I can do that, I can be a part. When there are a lot who go, am I supposed to be there? Is this even possible? Or I'm working 2 jobs, I can't get there at 6 p.m.
Great, thank you, Nikki. So I'm hearing largely accessibility, meeting people where they are in terms of getting to understand what the plan is for the referendum, what's in it, what's not. Thank you.
And maybe just to flesh out what I had written down is when we build out our team of folks that are kind of driving our campaign, there's maybe 2 or 3 groups to call out. One is students, so outside of kind of engagement during class time in schools, but the other was someone from Lisa's team, so from the instructional design perspective, and to include visits to surrounding community schools in that. I think, right now we've got a set of really great ideas from our own community and from our architects and from our staff and students. And we exist in a competitive situation, right? And so I'd love to actually go see some of the newer schools around us, and if you have recommendations of even schools not right around us, but just to see to really be able to envision what's possible.
Great.
With a broader group of people. I think some of the board may want to participate in that, but for me, that's about the kind of broader team of people supporting the referendum that would be able to participate.
I would love to, on some of it, at least from a disability point of view, again, would be, I see certain accessibility things differently. I know, and Nanda, you also have disability experience, so if you would like to go to the VI, that also would.
Right, so I'm hearing, I'm sorry.
I said if you want to go to the VI, you also have disability experience.
So I'm hearing, take a look at team membership, getting some broad expertise, bringing in more of the instructional side, making sure we tap students. Also hearing just what's shaking out there in the community, what's happening out in other school districts, other
Site
schools.
visits, yep. Site visits to see some other schools.
Great, thank you.
Ali, do you want to jump in?
Ali, are you there?
I think we lost.
She might not be
She's connected. Ali, are you there? I'll text her.
All right, you got it, Barb? All right.
Thank you, Barb.
Oh, thank you. So I will sign my piece of art.
Awesome.
Very nice, very nice.
People plagiarize. Can't do that without giving full credit. So I drew Madison, and I'm looking at this approach that in some way or another we're not surveying everything, right? So just coming from this universalism space of we're missing a lot of marks. So this is not for this group or this group, but an exclusion of somebody else, right? And I think about I do many different communities throughout Madison, and what is our universal goal around the referendum is to 100% serve folks, not to compare it to Verona, but to actually look at the many assets that Madison has and really highlight them, right? So what is our universal goal for all our families and also our residents, right? So people that do not have children in our schools. And then for each of those groups, what is the targeted approach to each of them, to provide not just an opportunity, not just access to really meaningful engagement with them. So I drew different ways to circle the communities as a way to demonstrate sort of the targeted approach. And to highlight also that within that targeted group, there might be another level of a targeted approach. So Nikki spoke to folks with different abilities, but they are not a monolithic group.
No.
So how do we look at that group, but not just have one representation, but how do we have multiple representations?
Exactly.
And making sure that, either folks can go to their community and elevate some information back to kind of serve, as liaison to that, but to make sure that we're not missing. And to create fail-safes that if we don't have, so let's see if we're doing a target approach to Hmong families on the north side, that if 2 Hmong families show up, we need to go back and do something different, What is it that we missed? Why we only have 2 families attending, and not be satisfied with that. That's not enough. Like, we need to have a greater, voice in that, and own that we have made a misstep, or was not the right day, or not the right location, and what are the people, and utilize. Our community is so well. There's so much wealth of people that are actually cultural brokers that have access to the community and the speed dial. Utilize those individuals, compensate them, making sure that the outreach plan is actually responsive to them, not just telling folks like, oh, we want to do this listening session with the Latino community. Go find your people, come to the space to actually help them, have them design what would it look like a meaningful listening session or outreach or engagement with the Latino community. Again, trying to avoid the monolithic approach. What does it look like on the south side? What does it look like on the west of this area? It's different folks from many different countries speaking many different languages and dialects. So I think just honoring that part, I think is really important.
Thank you. So, I'm sorry, please.
I really love Ananda's focus on targeted universalism, because I think a good communications plan gets as specific as possible about who you're talking to and what you want them to do. And speaking broadly, we want people to pass a referendum, but when you start to get more specific, we actually want specific communities to have different meaningful types of input into the shape of that referendum, as well as we have to talk to different people differently about why they should support the referendum. The vast majority of voters don't have kids in the schools. And I think we have to acknowledge that while it's really important to talk to the people who are going to use the buildings, we also have to be talking to the people who may never use these buildings, but care about our community having really great schools. And so I just kind of split 3 different broad audiences that I know have a lot of overlap. But the first one is just the big audience of taxpayers and voters, because we need them to support this referendum. We need them to vote for it. We need them to be excited about it. Then getting more specific, we've got our students and families, people more intimately tied to our buildings. And not only do we want them to support the referendum, we want them to shape the referendum. So that's a different type of communications goal. In the process of getting them to shape the referendum, we have to be really thoughtful about families that work second and third shift, families that don't speak English. We should have community meetings primarily in languages that are not English. We can interpret them for English if we want to, but the interpretation should be the English. It should not be Spanish or Hmong or Nepali. And finally, I think one audience we want to engage in a meaningful way is people with expertise in some of the things we want to accomplish with a referendum, including equity, sustainability. Oops. So people with expertise in equity, sustainability, instructional design, community engagement, extracurriculars like athletics or arts. Bring them in to actually vet our plans. The reason for this is twofold. We get a better plan, and we get a group of people to go out to the community of voters and cheer for our plan and say, I've got expertise in the arts, and I think this plan is really great for the arts. I've got expertise in the athletics, and we're going down the right path. So hopefully that type of community engagement benefits us in multiple ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because you mentioned South Madison, Madison College plan. Thank you. I'll take on it now. But I'm a cheerleader for the South Madison
Yep.
campus.
Yep.
One thing that didn't come up here yet was that the importance of make South Madison campus salient and visually look like the neighborhood, the community. Just as we're moving into the high schools and changing and shift, like what does it look like having the high schools look like Madison and the Madison students in a very intentional way. The art, Native Americans are often a group that gets forgotten when we're talking about, so honoring the land that those buildings sit on, honoring, we are on borrowed land, making sure that that's a knowledge that our students are being exposed, all the time, visually and through their curriculum.
Also, one other thing, if I may, I'm sorry, Anika, one other thing that I think might be helpful in this plan is we're the first to pass that carbon referendum. West is doing some really interesting things on their roof, on gardens and solar panels. I think we could advertise some of that. And I think you'll get a lot of community people saying, I want to be a part of that.
All right, last commentary, Anika, and then can we move forward?
Yeah, so my drawing, which is right here with all the stick figures, is basically about like different ways we can talk to like different populations. I focus a lot on the student voice because like being a student, I have like a first-hand perspective of like using technology to reach out to students, and then making sure that we're targeting like all the different types of students, because like just focusing or talking about the student voice, different environments affect different students like in different ways. So like either going to classrooms or like having more specialized focus groups, like ways like that where we can ensure that we're getting like all the student voice and community engagement.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's keep moving.
All right.
Yep.
Absolutely. So the next several slides just introduce the draft plan as it currently exists. So our plan intends to build awareness and knowledge of building excellence of the referendum in particular. And we're back on with Ali. To capture and reflect then the values of the community, and then use that opportunity to elevate voice to then guide our decisions. Also an opportunity to generate some new ideas, maybe something we haven't seen can be introduced through this process and added to the referendum. And then to also just ensure some good, strong support for the referendum. So I thought we would only briefly go through this. This is a page and a half, and I'm only going to talk about the bottom third of the first page and the middle of the second. So that is an outline of our strategies. I won't talk to you about our methods or our purpose or anything like that, but our strategies are 4 different things. Most communities will do a survey of some sort, and we will do that. So that's something that's going to be available online. We're pretty adept at doing a climate survey, for example. We would make a similar strategy available, but more broadly because this does impact all of our residents, not just MMSD families. We would also then do what on here we refer to as open community input sessions, probably 4. Just if you're interested, you can come and talk. So those 2 strategies are very, very common. A lot of school districts do stop there. We do have a lot of experience with focus groups, and we will be using that strategy. We found it very helpful in the past to seek out some of the groups or groups within groups that we're talking about tonight, find out where they're meeting, existing opportunities, and we tap into those opportunities. That way we know that we're elevating that voice, and we know that we're meeting people where they are, both physically and in terms of access. And then earlier a comment was made that some sort of body of experts or some sort of kind of sounding board would be advisable, and we couldn't agree more. In this case, we refer to it as recurring focus groups. So these are sustained opportunities for a core of people a relatively small group, to really help us work through some of the thornier issues and give us a broader perspective outside of the district. I will reveal that just over 8 years ago, I was involved in some similar strategies around potential crowding at Kennedy, Alice, Elvium, and West Ramundo. And the move to Maywood largely resolved that issue for the time being. But we did have a group of we went large, I think it was pushing 24 people. What we learned there was groups that are too large, with too many meetings, that are too loose in terms of exploration, tend to lose their oomph. They tend to lose some of their effectiveness over that period of time. So we're going to try a different model with this and do a smaller group, much more succinct in terms of role, responsibility, fewer frequency of meetings, those kinds of things. So trying to get at some of the things that you had raised this evening. The last piece on here is just simply the timeline. So this maps out a timeline that gets the board a report on all of this public input, these 4 different strategies, at their operations work group meeting in January. So this allows us to get all of our input through late November, work on the summarization and understanding of that, so it can inform recommendations in December that we would then bring to the board in January. So those are the strategies, and that's the timeline, and that's really all I needed to highlight in this doc.
So maybe one last round for feedback, just one comment for everyone in terms of community engagement, and
Yeah.
then we can go to the financials. And Ali, why don't we start with you since you didn't have an opportunity to share previously? Are you there?
Yes, I am. So sharing in terms of opportunities for community engagement.
Correct. Any feedback from either your individual brainstorm or your feedback from the long-range facilities plan, community engagement and input plan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, we as a group have established that the voices that are really important to us is everybody's voice, and so making sure that our educators and our students and our families are at the table and being heard from and are accessing the conversation, you know, in ways that accommodate the needs of each individual family, I think is where we have our work cut out for us. I do echo some of what Nikki said in terms of, you know, really making sure we have an expansive relationship with outreach. I think our ability to synthesize feedback and to pick up on themes is really relevant, because I think we represent the community, and part of community input is, you know, being voted for. And so I think we have, you know, an obligation to make sound decisions and well-informed decisions, and also to function from a space of efficiency, because, you know, we're talking about people's work environments and people's children right now, not 10 years from now. And so I think our ability to have a robust conversation and simultaneously to really have the restraint to find the areas of focus and find the common ground of our community and emphasize that is you know, an exercise in discipline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to throw out a few more things about community engagement. First of all, I would reiterate, I think in addition to what you've got down here, we need to pull together an expert committee or team that's external and that will both vet our plans through the lens of their expertise and build support for what we're trying to do. I think we need to explicitly engage PTOs at all of our schools for a number of reasons. You've got a bunch of parents who are really good at raising money and building support for projects, and it's a way to especially get our elementary and middle school parents aware of the fact that these changes at the high schools will impact their kids, and they, you know, this is a good thing for them to get on board with. And when we're doing our focus groups and asking questions, I know from going to lots of these focus groups, we tend to ask a lot of things like, what are you excited about and what really, you know, grips you in this plan? I think we absolutely need to ask in different ways to different groups, what's missing? And I think the reason we have to ask that, if I think back to the last facilities referendum we did, which was, you know, we did a lot of schools, and when people, you know, I think one of the things that clinched it was when we went out and asked what's missing, and it was Jefferson and the East High Theater. And everybody was worried that those were too expensive and nobody would vote for the referendum if we put them in. And actually it turned out that people were so passionate about those two projects that they were more likely to support a more expensive referendum because we figured out those things were missing, we figured out people wanted to support them, and we added them, and it worked. So asking people what's missing and asking lots of people with different lenses what's missing, I think is really, really important as we go through this process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I wrote down like having a community referendum navigators. So folks in our community that either, they're elected officials, but non-elected officials that, can mobilize communities, can digest this information and bridge this information to the many communities in Madison, whether they don't have children in our district, whether they live in a trailer park in the south side, whether they live in a far north side, on a far west side. So, folks that we can identify, in multiple ways to have this comprehensive list and kind of share back with us to make sure, like, okay, is there a group that is missing that we needed to make sure that we are, that we have this navigator that can digest this information and make sure that folks are either showing up or filling out the survey or participating in a focus group in some way, shape, or form, so that they can also be sort of our steerships folks to really like buy in. Because I think I heard Chris saying that it was one of the pieces that really resonated to me.
Just real quick, Kate, if I could chime in on that. When we did our strategic framework engagement, Annette Miller from Equity by Design helped us design some of the facets of that process that was the targeted part as opposed to the universal. And I think it was a highly effective process. She did a kind of a final report for us with some recommendations for how we might want to think about future engagement. I'll be sure to send that around, make sure that our team has seen it, because I think it might point at some of the recommendations the board has made tonight.
Nikki, do you have any other comments?
Just transparency is always good, because I want all of the community to know when the meetings are, not just people who work, which is hugely important, but there are people who have to plan transportation, say, around childcare and work and that. And so if they don't know until the last minute that a meeting's going to be there, they may not have arranged a babysitter. They may not have been able to arrange a ride or a pickup. And because of that, they may not be able to participate.
I really like the idea. I think the idea of a team of some nature has come up a couple of times tonight, a broader group than I know the internal team. And so I would appreciate, the next time we talk about seeing what the expanded team scope is and how we plan to use that group and engage them, which I think, Jen, is some of what you're speaking to. Maybe very tactically, the other comment I would have on this is just if we could get literally a list of by month what's happening, shared in one of our maybe at our monthly board meeting or something, but just tack it on. I think it would be helpful to see kind of who are we speaking to, who's coming. It doesn't need to have synthesized feedback, et cetera. I know that takes more time, but just kind of be able to track that progress. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, you got it, Kate. And I think it's worth emphasizing that I think this plan that Andrew and the team put together is about the kind of initial input to get the referendum package shaped up. Some of what's come up tonight is about more of the
is a vote yes
engagement.
campaign, correct?
Exactly, which would be,
but
of course,
I think
second half of the
thinking strategically about how to pair the two can really help us to Ananda's point, have these kind of super users and communities that have been asked their opinion, who can then be champions once we have a plan. That one naturally leads to the other, and as we invest time in hearing from both targeted and universal individuals and communities, that those are probably the exact right people to be championing the referendum campaign, right? So that's just maybe very a tactical comment. I have a bigger picture comment that I don't want to get into a big discussion on, but I have a little bit of a concern about two assumptions that have been made in the dialogue so First is we are marching towards a November 2020 vote in everything that we've been talking to. We could, as a group, decide to vote in April. There are pros and cons, I think, to doing that. One of the reasons to do that would be, from my perspective, we do it before anyone on the board turns over. And so there's a high degree of alignment between the people that are crafting a plan and the people supporting it. We could. Yep. And the other is that we would be bringing in a new superintendent with a past referendum instead of asking that superintendent to champion a plan, as was pointed out earlier, that they have had less thumbprints on. And what a fantastic way to come into a city on the back of a referendum like this with such opportunity to impact schools and have that be kind of done and let them focus on engaging in schools and instruction and likely many other things that they're going to want to focus on. So I don't want to have that discussion tonight. I don't think we're prepared for it, and I think we need more people in the room.
Yeah.
I wanted to name it because we kind of need to change path soon, I think, if we wanted to change the timeline. And you guys probably want to speak to that. I have one other thing that there's an assumption that I want to name as well.
Just 1 second. Were you going to talk about pros and cons for November as well, or were you?
I mean, to be honest, these guys know way more about the pros and cons. From my personal perspective, there's a couple of pros to at least talk about as a group in terms of we could pull the vote forward and not pull our vote forward, but not the community vote. Or we could pull both forward. I think it's something for folks to think about, and maybe the next discussion we can. And if you guys want to comment now, maybe you have some.
I mean, I'm a little worried about if there's any more community input. We have a timeline slide next. Perhaps it's better for.
Okay. Yeah. Maybe, Kelly, let me name the other assumption because it's relevant to the community piece here. The other thing that we haven't spoken a lot about yet publicly is the fact that we are in our final year of an operating to and exceed referendum for our regular operating budget, which pays our staff and runs the school district. We will be faced with a choice this year as to whether we want to offer another operating to exceed referendum. And we haven't built that into the dialogue or the feedback process thus far. We've been very focused on our capital referendum to improve and innovate in our facilities. And so I wanted to name those two assumptions because I think we want to, as we engage the city, make sure that we are all aligned on when we're voting and what we're voting on. And we haven't yet had those two discussions. So I just wanted to name those two kind of maybe more foundational things. And I jumped the gun probably by 1 page, but maybe you guys can.
I just wanted to be conscious that we were moving forward. So the slide in front of you is the project calendar for the November 2020 referendum. We are kind of on time, on target for everything we had planned to be ready for the November 2020 referendum. It's a very intentional strategy, a very intentional communication strategy, such that when we do this communication feedback loop that Andrew just talked to you about between August and December, you'll see it up there. Kate, I am getting to your comments. I just want to make sure we're here first. And then in January, you get the report. When we get the feedback on the community, the goal is to be able to respond to the feedback. That means we might need to go back to the community and ask some follow-up survey questions. We might need to refocus group. We might need to pull subject matter experts back into play. That's what would happen between January and when the board ultimately votes. That vote then is what the question is going to be on the referendum. It determines the scope and the dollar amount. The latest that can happen is May 25th, legally. Kate, to your point of board turnover, we hear you loud and clear. Our recommendation is that the board would probably look to the March timeframe to vote. That would get the communication plan in your hands in January, would give us time to move with the community, to kind of refocus based on what we're hearing from them and you. and then come forward for the board to vote for us to go to referendum in March.
Just to interject quickly, that could be 2 questions, right? To your earlier point, one on the facilities, one on operating revenue.
Yeah, it can be. And so I can come back to that a little bit too. I just want to make sure everyone understands then that once that vote happens, be it March or be it May, we shift to a different phase of work, to Jen's point early on.
Okay.
The only points that we can make at that point going forward is information and facts. That's when the board and the community take the referendum to the street to get it passed, right? So that's also gives kind of more time for that phase if the board goes to early vote in May, marching to the November referendum. If we were to move everything up earlier, and you want the community to vote on the long-range facility plan in April, that means we would need to shorten that community feedback phase, that August to December. You probably cut all of December off and probably half of November, because we'll need, or even earlier, Andrew's probably going to say, you probably cut November off too, so that we can get the communication information back to you, and you probably cut off that ability for us to go back to the community, because you would have to vote for the referendum question and dollar amount by the January regular board meeting. And being the holidays in the middle, you lose a lot of time. So on kind of that alone, we don't recommend it. We're recommending that the board take a very serious community engagement strategy, that we do all the things that you're envisioning, and that we make sure we do it well and allow for this second opportunity to make sure we get it right. If anything new comes out of the, what is missing question. So that's kind of the April kind of pro and con. There's also kind of pulling the right financing packages together. There's also the intentional strategy that we tied to the presidential election in November. We think everybody's going to be voting in November, or people might stay home in April. So there's some strategy built into that as well. Now, Ali, did you want to jump in before I go on?
Yeah, so I just wanted to chime in and thank Kelly for speaking to the portion in which we are responsive to the community feedback, because I do want to emphasize that I think it's important not only to hear what the community has to say, but also to utilize that and to operationalize how we utilize community feedback. And so I think it is one thing to hear from folks, it's another thing to be responsive to what folks are saying, and I really appreciate speaking to the amount of time it takes for us to be able to do that effectively and to be really committed to hearing as many voices as possible.
All right, so to Kate's second question, which is that, it was a difficult budget season, but we were able to kind of, get through it thanks to some wins from the state. We couldn't really talk about the board wanting to do a potential second question, which is an operating to exceed question, until the state budget was completed, right? There were just too many wild cards hanging out there. We got some surprises as it is. So now that the state budget is underway and we have a little more insight into what the future holds, we can start gearing up towards talking about whether the board wants to put a second question on the referendum ballot, which is another reason for me to stick towards November 2020. Being that we would be just starting this conversation, I think you'd want to make sure that we've got the right runway with the community feedback on that as well. So my recommendation is that the September reparation work group, we start the conversation, we look at some financials, and perhaps the board in their kind of August planning meeting wants to think about what that looks like too. But I think, now is the right phase to start talking about that and start to decide where the board falls on, kind of consensus building on that.
Does anyone else have any commentary, I guess, on timeline? I mean, yeah.
Kate, I really appreciate your bringing up the operating referendum. I was kind of holding back on that until we got to the budget part of this discussion. I totally appreciate, Kelly, the need to, since we haven't even talked about it yet, to make sure that we have adequate time to write a good question and to get it passed. I don't think this is the meeting to do this at because we didn't actually notice it in the agenda, but I think we actually need to have a conversation in the operations work group about what our budget process is going to look like for the coming school year. Given that we don't have an operating referendum, it's going to be a really tough budget. And then if we are able to pass an operating referendum in November, is that retroactive? And how do we plan for that? These are questions that actually keep me up at night. So I'd love to talk about it. You know, I love talking about the facilities referendum. It's exciting, it's new stuff, but without that operating to exceed referendum, we're looking at a lot of difficult cuts and choices in programs, in class size. So
Yeah. Yeah. Nikki.
I just want to boost what Chris said. I just did, along with Chris, the 60-mile march. I was only there the last day, not all 60 miles. I'm not that fit. But very, very simply, Palmyra Eagle voted to dissolve because the referendum didn't pass. They're gone. After this next year, they will not exist. I grew up 10 miles from there. That a lot of people say it can never happen here. The problem is if we take advantage and don't be thoughtful and considerate of what the people want, it very well could. I'm not trying to sound doom and gloom, but it's a possibility.
Cool. Any other comments? Okay, cool. Let's keep going.
There's just a few financial slides in here. The intent of these slides is to answer questions that were open in May and to make sure the right foundation is laid before we move into the community engagement phase, where the majority of our focus will be kind of after this meeting. So you've already seen this slide. This is just a reminder about why now is the right time and why the scope that we're talking about is the right scope. By 2026, we will be virtually out of debt. By 2027, we will be entirely out of debt. That is unheard of for a school district of our size. Now is the time to start layering the debt back in, and it's what makes this affordable at this scale moving forward. You've seen this slide before as well.
Yeah.
This is what it looks like to layer the debt in. There are always multiple structures you could build for how you want to kind of like issue the debt and pay it off over time. What you've been seeing is a very intentional strategy. That's a strategy that pays off the debt early on. In the front years, we pay more on the principal to pay the principal down. That has the benefit of lowering our interest costs, but it also has the benefit of allowing the mill rate to drop after those first couple years, which then structurally would allow you to layer more referendums in if that's what the board chooses to do in 2024 and 2028. When we met in May, Mary in particular asked for more details about the analysis. Now, this is not what I expect the level of detail board members to be at. That's not the reason why I'm sharing it with you, to be clear. This is my job and the level of detail I get to work on. I'm just going to point out to you the kind of the key takeaways in the structure. The first red box towards the top is where you see the early payments of principal being larger to help pay down the debt. The second red box you see is that impact of 53 cents increase on the mill rate due to this debt. That impact is pretty much immediate because we're making those bigger payments up front, but it starts to fall down. So the mill rate impact starts to become much smaller than the 53 cents. So that's the second piece of the structure that's important. Probably the third piece to point out is you see in the green numbers, we will not go to bond for one great big huge $280 million. We actually can't spend that much money that fast. And you don't want to, go to the market for more money than you need. So we're probably looking at 3 separate bond issuances, just to note. And we also have built into this whole analysis assumptions on interest rates. You'll see interest rates up here, 4.75, 5, 2.5. That's 2% higher than where we're at right now. It's a very conservative interest rate to take, but these bond issuances are a good number of years out in the future, and our interest rates have been moving on us. And so at this point, we want to take a conservative look at our interest rates, but as the time goes on, hoping those interest rates will look better, and that'll bring all these costs down. So just some important key points to note. The second open item from the May operation work group was a question of, can we really afford going to referendum in 24, 28? How do we know, or how can we have some assurance that that's going to be possible for us? And that we don't have to kind of stack it all into this year or never. And this graph we built to show you it's possible. By the time you get to 2024, 2028, you could choose to restructure this in all kinds of different ways. The blue and the gold that you see on the left is the exact same bar chart I just showed you a minute ago. Then, starting in 2025, we illustrate for you layering in $100 million of potential future referendum debt. You see the same strategy. You pay off a lot at the beginning, and then you start to taper it off over time. And then you would layer in 2028, potentially, a third $100 million referendum. And on that one, you don't get the benefit of paying it off so much. You got to push it off into the future to make it all work. In this case, you can do that all by just adding another 2 cents to the mill rate, looking at the future. Now, like I said, all kinds of assumptions could change between now and then on interest rates, or even on the second question that this board might be looking at in a couple months. This is simply to illustrate to you that we can do this type of a referendum strategy if this is the direction the board wants to head in over time. Not a decision that needs to be made now or today, to our earlier conversation. And this slide's really simple, just showing to you that, as was quoted earlier, our overall kind of mill rate, in particular the amount of debt that we take on, is well below our peers. Even when you layer in the $280 million, that's the red dotted box, it's a little hard to see. You just get above Wisconsin Heights and maybe at Cambridge. And then adding two more $100 million referendums out into the future, there's barely NICSU even a little further to the left. Now, all things will change between now and then. Other school districts will go to referendums. Different decisions will be made around the general fund over time, so this will change. But this is to illustrate to you again of where we would be moving in comparison to our peers if you were to take on like an every 4-year facility referendum strategy to keep our facilities moving in the direction you want to head in. Oh, the formatting on this slide is not what it looks like in the PDF version, so I apologize for that. I'll just wrap us up real quick since we're at the end. The last slide here is just our kind of focus on keeping us on track to November 2020. We will not be voting on the facilities plan in January, so that top line has been removed via today's meeting. We come back to you formally in January with our community input. We start that process right away in August, and as I heard earlier tonight, we'll be giving the board monthly updates, not only on our planning, but on what we're kind of hearing thus far into the communication plan. And at this point, May 25 is where we have kind of set for the board to vote, but as we get to the August operation work group, I'd love to get some confirmation from the board then, if the board wants to vote earlier, and we can calendar that into March or another time.
Yeah. Kelly, can you just put this into kind of maybe easier language? So we're talking about the mill rate going from X to Y, regular homeowner going from X to Y in terms of dollars. So an incremental $150, like just what's the kind of impact?
Yeah, so all of that is in the May operation work group meeting.
I don't remember
all of the numbers totally with me, but it was all presented in the May operation work group.
Okay.
As far as those specific dollars. So the 53 cents is what the impact would be for this bond issuance assumed at $280 million. That's the incremental.
So
for those
reason I was
first years.
asking now was to get a sense of the range if we're making very conservative assumptions on a 4.5% interest rate. If that's really 2 or 2.5, what's the range really versus sticking with a single number in people's heads? I don't remember what the number was from May either. It was 150-ish, I think.
It was 156 and 86.
Thank you, Nikki. Perfect. So does that go if the interest rate is more stable? Does that 156 turn into 100 or 50? Like, do we have a sense of the...
It would go down. I would have to do the actual analysis for a 2% interest rate for you. I can't answer that tonight.
I would appreciate just
Sure.
calibrate us on the range. If we're being conservative, let's also have a you know, a floor or whatever,
Sure.
what people
Yep.
could expect.
So I'm just kind of, I would actually like to see an analysis of the numbers you've presented with a potential operating referendum on top of it, because we're going to be looking at additional debt service for that, and that's going to bump the mill rate
That's
up.
the September operation work group.
Yeah, so that's going to be key in making decisions. I'm also, this is a hard question to wrap my head around, but there's all the comparisons to neighboring districts, but Madison actually has more in common in some ways with rural districts than our neighboring suburban districts, in that we are a high property value area, like a lot of rural areas with high, lakefront property, with declining or flat enrollment, which means that we lose in the school funding formula in ways that suburban districts do not lose. And I'm just wondering, we make the comparisons, but what do we need to be thinking about in terms of the bigger picture of state funding in terms of making those comparisons? And are there different risks that we take in taking on debt that our suburban neighbors don't take because they don't fall into that boat in the funding formula? Does that make sense? Like we're estimating 15% losses in equalization aid each year because of our high tax levies, because we're considered a high property wealth district, but we don't have the growth in students. You add more debt on top of that. Are we taking on different risks than suburban districts that have growth as well as high property value?
I don't know about risks. We definitely, because of the funding formula and our kind of lack of funding from the state via that formula, we definitely put more burden on the local taxpayer than other districts like us, would traditionally do, with our low income levels, our ELL population. We look more like, Wanakee when it comes to the school formula. So I don't know about rural, but your mention of like lakeside communities, we do stack up in the funding formula. We look more like them because we have higher property values, right? And traditionally, those districts don't have the low-income ELL population that we have. And so this funding formula is not built for us. It's more about equal than equality. Yep.
I actually wouldn't mind just expanding a little bit to what the comparison question from Chris around the slide 19. Barb, can you move us up a little bit to where it shows 2020, 24, 28, and then one more up. Yeah, that one. Can you talk a little bit more about what were? Can you explain this to me in different words?
Yeah, so in the operation work group, this particular chart was pulled out by the board and a conversation was had around this chart. So we just brought this back as a reference. The conversation that we had in the May operation work group was around why not more? Why don't we go to 500 million? And part of it is we don't have the capacity, right, to take on more schools, more projects. We can't, there aren't even the contractors available in Madison to do all this work at the same time. We have to kind of span this work out over time while acknowledging that there is more work we could ever do than in one referendum. And so that was the conversation around this slide.
I appreciate the reminder. And then, Barb, do you mind just going 2 slides down, please, to where the comparison? I don't know who is it. Oh, sorry, Kelly. That one, yeah. So we're comparing with many different districts, including rural districts. I don't tell me what is positive about how we're doing this, because it's an outlier compared to the other districts. Is that the right question?
Yeah, I don't know that positive and negative, is kind of the right framing. We are doing things different.
Okay.
For one, we have a Fund 80 that we rely on for community services, as you'll see a lot of neighboring organizations don't. So we're different. And the board over time has made kind of decisions into how you spend your general fund. So you'll see that the general fund, the gray bar, is a higher percentage of the mill rate than in most of our other districts. I think there's only one district that comes close to us in comparison. So we spend our mill rate money more on general funds than in other investments. You know, sometimes our Fund 41 capital fund, for example, is smaller as a percentage proportion of mill rate. That has a lot to do with the board decisions over time and the cuts we make in tough budget years. So different districts have made different decisions that make these charts look very different. But you'll see our blue bar, is very small because we haven't gone through some of the same big referendums that other districts have.
On to Ali's earlier question on maintenance, that blue bar capital, everyone else is spending a quarter-ish. I don't know, looks like a quarter-ish of their regular dollars into facilities, and we are not.
The green, is it the green part?
It's the the blue on the. It's like the second.
the blue?
The blue is what those comparators are spending on facilities on capital.
I thought the blue was the referendum. That am I not looking right?
There's two blues in there.
Is there multiple blues?
It's kind of like a light blue and a dark blue.
Oh,
the screen might
dark
be.
Blue. Oh, I see. Okay. All right. I may need tutoring on this graph, but I'll
Happy to
get
provide it
another
at any
time.
time.
Yeah, you can do that. But thank you for.
Next time, can we not use two blues though?
Sure.
It's kind of like when Wisconsin played
on the
Illinois.
financials. I'm hearing a desire to bring these two discussions together with respect to the operating to exceed as well as capital, and give us some more color maybe in terms of impact to homeowners.
And I appreciate you bringing up, Kelly, about what we discussed in May, because I remember and I remember you bringing it up, and it made total sense. But I feel like when we talk about the facilities plan and the referendum, I feel like every once in a while goes in the back, and it's like, okay, this is why we're doing what the amount that's the answer to a lot of people's questions. Like, how do we come up with this money? Because there's enough capacity. There's only enough capacity to hire folks to do the work. So there is a strategy to that. Like, how do we actually tell the strategy story? That's what comes up for me. So thank you for that.
Do you folks need anything else?
Chris has
So Kelly, I appreciate your questions about the rural-urban comparison I brought up. And the reason I brought it up is because actually, if you look at rural Wisconsin, you've got a lot of districts that have high property values and also have crippling poverty, because rural poverty is a real serious thing right now. And a lot of them have had a hard time passing referenda as a result of that. And so I think as much as it's nice to look at the surrounding suburban districts and say we want everything we have, we also have to be realistic about the fact that we have a really different population and funding base in Madison, and we have to be, I think, honest with ourselves about that fact. So that's why I brought it up.
I agree completely.
We have another meeting still, so
Yeah,
I would like
I
to
think
move
we're
us
good, you
forward if we.
guys. We're gonna put the facilities plan on the shelf. We will make those updates. Yeah, post it so that it's still guidance but not voted on. And I think we've got some really good feedback on the community engagement. We'll get back to you on what that plan looks like.
We have 5 minutes.
Good? Thanks, team.
Okay.
Good job.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Anika, your advisory vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. We'll take 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene.
Brenda's
up here if I can. All right.
Matt will look into that privately.
Excuse me?
Matt will look into that other thing that I told you.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to call our next meeting to order. This is a special Board of Education meeting in open session workshop, so we do not have any public appearances at the beginning of this. We have two topics tonight. The first is a discussion item on board ethics, and the second is on the budgetary reserve that we voted on at the last overall board meeting. So I'm hoping that this will be relatively quick.
Is that Ali calling in?
It might be. Let me pause.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Ali. All right, we are in session at this point for our special meeting, and I think I'm gonna maybe just give a little bit of background on the ethics discussion we're about to have, and then Matt is gonna join us to answer any questions. I think the goal of this discussion is to align on, as a group, what, if any, further action is required on this topic, based on both our discussion as well as the findings of outside counsel. So, by way of background, I mean, this was in reaction to a complaint that was raised around Gloria's participation in our SRO discussions and voting. And though that discussion has been going on for, I guess, almost 2 years since I've been on the board, Gloria had originally chosen to not participate as a result of her role overseeing the Police and Fire Commission at the city as a part of her role as a deputy mayor. As a result of the mayoral election this spring, her role changed at the city, and she therefore changed her participation in that discussion and in voting. And so this issue, I guess, came up as a result of that change. And she, which I think is commendable for her, she's hired an outside counsel to kind of form their own opinion, which is in the document shared for this discussion. So we've all had a chance to review that. And Matt, I believe you've had a chance to also speak with that attorney around this opinion that was raised. So look, I mean, this is our role, right? This is a policy we made for ourselves. Nobody else has influence over how we want to govern ourselves, and so this is our opportunity to, I think, have a good and open discussion around what our expectation is of ourselves as a board, and then the goal is to close this out and ensure that we kind of leave here aligned on an outcome. So I don't know if anyone has any discussion, questions, comments. Ananda.
Just for the record, Gloria Reyes sought outside counsel at her own expenses.
Correct. Nikki.
My only suggestion would be, and it doesn't directly affect, as I've read the partnership and the contract agreements 6 times as an attorney, and they're not the world's clearest in certain parts. I think the best way to handle it would be to possibly discuss looking at the policy to make it clearer in the future. I think that would be the best way to handle the situation. In law, we look at it in the light that is the most favorable to the defendant. We look at the evidence in that light in an appeal and in those cases. And in this situation, we can't change the policy we had if it is ambiguous, not if it's clear. Ed, please correct me if I am wrong, because you're the only other lawyer besides Matt, so please.
We got too many lawyers in the room already, so.
So please do. But very, very simply, I think the best way to handle it is to make our procedures clearer. And that way we can avoid problems in the future. But I don't think we can go back and punish someone for something that wasn't clear to begin with.
I think that's a really interesting idea, Nikki. I mean, in my read of this, the goal of our policy and my read of it is to prevent board members from participating in decisions from which they would personally benefit. It's the reason that Ali excuses herself because there's a financial incentive to make a certain decision. And I think our policy could be clearer that that's really the goal.
Right.
And certainly the outside counsel found here that in Gloria's role as a grants administrator in the development piece of the city. I think that I'm messing up the title, but that there's no conflict of interest. There's no personal gain here. It's incredibly clear that there's no violation of our ethics policy.
Also, I'd like to try and get vendor defined better and
it's an interesting idea.
and partnership defined better just in the future, because frankly, I had that when I was drafting the Simpsons string. What constituted a partnership, what didn't. And it wasn't the world's clearest.
Yeah. Any other comments?
I am curious about, because I'm reflecting on my own conflicts, because I serve in a Madison College board, which is a volunteer position. So financially, I don't benefit, but the organization that I have fiduciary duties to would financially benefit. So I'm with Nikki 100% to kind of look at the language to identify those things, and to also clarify the extent of the financial implication.
I think that's a good next step. I would like to keep this discussion really focused on maybe this specific topic, just partly because it's agendized and partly because
I probably broke about
No,
eight
you're
rules by
good, Nikki,
doing
but
it.
I think it's a good outcome of this discussion.
Okay, so I'm gonna say this. I appreciate.
I'm sorry, Kate, do you mind if I chime in?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yep, go for it.
I am curious, what are the objectives of this conversation, and how are we going to realize that we can conclude this conversation?
Yeah,
What do we need this conversation to resolve in?
we need this conversation to resolve in all of us agreeing that this matter is closed or not closed. That is it. There is no vote. There is no motion. This is an opportunity for board members to ask questions about this particular issue that was raised, but it is not a broad ethics discussion about our policy and how to change it if we want to.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think then, are we asking individual board members to say whether or not they subscribe to the ethics complaint or agree with the ethics complaint, or whether or not we agree that there was not an ethics violation?
I think we just, that's exactly what we need to hear, Ali, is we basically have to, either accept the findings of this outside counsel that there was no ethics complaint, or take a different path.
I think this is a really complicated conversation to have, in part because of the vote that is involved, but without getting into kind of the weeds of the vote or the weeds of our policy, I would say that I agree with the outside counsel. I think that Gloria managed her conflict of interest with integrity, and I think when her role shifted, that she gained the ability to vote.
Okay.
I also stick with outside counsel.
Okay. Okay, me as well. I think that discussion is closed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Matt. And we can, during our August discussion, I think re-raise kind of if we as a group want to clarify the policy overall, that's probably the right time to raise that and agendize that.
That's at the organizational meeting.
Correct. Yep. Okay.
In addition to clarifying the policy, I think just making sure we all thoroughly understand the policy. As a new board member, that would be really helpful to me, to not just discuss in an individual onboarding session, but actually discuss as a group.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to our budget discussion. Kelly, maybe we can do this quickly as well.
Yeah, maybe I think first it's best to start with how this meeting was agendized, because it should be also pretty tight and pretty quick. This is not a budget discussion as much as I am looking for direction from the board regarding the $185,000 that was cut through board member amendments to the budget in the June 24th board meeting and put into a reserve. So we're at the point in our budgeting process where we want to take the $185,000 that's in reserve and put it towards an expenditure. Okay, so I'm looking for your direction tonight. There's a motion for Kate to read when you're ready. to tell me to do such. There's probably a couple options on the table. I'll just lay them all out. One, the $185,000 could be restored to the original cuts that came out of the budget if the board wanted to go in that direction. As a reminder, that was $100,000 for the special education transition project and $85,000, which was a 1.0 FTE for the special education, kind of the LEAP programming. So those were the two things that were cut in the June 24th budget. I removed the funding, and it is now sitting in a reserve bucket. I'm looking for your direction tonight to either restore it to those particular programs, one. Two, a second option would be to use it to fund a current budget gap that came out of the state budget. So in order to fund kind of the Evers administration moves, they removed $250,000 that we were planning on for the ninth grade computer device. That's partially what funds our tech plan. That would be an option. If not, I will be working to solve that budget hole between now and October. By the time we get to October, I'll let you know how we solve that. There's still multiple moving parts, and so we'll be using those to help resolve that. And three, you can put it towards compensation. At the time of the board meeting, that was a decision that was not yet made, but I know that that's something that's on individual board members' minds. So we've written the motion such that that funding would go towards compensation. It's kind of our ongoing assumption. I just want to be clear that that doesn't have to be where it goes.
Mm-hmm. And to our earlier discussion, if we do end up voting on this motion, this would be a motion that Ali would not vote on. Since you're not in the room, Ali, just to say that kind of clearly.
Yeah, Kate, I want to voice that I think the first two options Kelly outlined are options that have, that have specific appeal, and I think restoring the funding to emphasize the need for this special education is something I would advocate for. Obviously, the third option is something that I can't speak to.
What is our current gap on compensation based on the new for people and the not full special ed funding?
With the new categorical for people aid, that would, and the motion the board passed to move that all towards comp, that brings you to 2.24%. If this $185,000 were to be put towards compensation, that would bring you to 2.32%. Now that's base wage. Total compensation would be 4.24 or 4.32 respectively. That's the total compensation on average.
Mm-hmm. Can I repeat it back just so I make sure that I understand? Mm-hmm. So we have, okay, do you want to repeat it?
Sure.
So,
yep. So base wage alone would move to 2.24%.
If with
the state budget per pupil aid put into comp, which the board has already directed me to do so.
Yeah.
Right. If you add the 185,000, it moves you to 2.32.
Good. Okay, thank you.
This is speculative, but have we seen any movement on the part of outside groups to legally challenge the additional, the line item veto and the additional funding that we're putting into compensation that came through the line item veto? Like, are we fairly certain we're going to get this money?
We're fairly certain we're going to get the money. There's nothing from like our lobbyist groups or even anyone that we work with that would, all the other districts are moving as this being our funding.
In order to get rid of the line item veto, they would need a constitutional amendment, which means 2 votes plus a veto plus then a referendum. So the chance of it getting there is another 1.5 to 2 years.
I tend to agree with Ali here that given that we did get incremental dollars that we put into compensation from the budget that we weren't expecting, significant incremental dollars, right, to the tune of a percent-ish of base wage, that this money, which was originally reserved to try to incrementally add to base wage that we didn't feel comfortable with, I would prefer to use this for either the original intent or to plug a hole created by that same budget that's adding to compensation. We also don't have a lot of votes sitting around the table tonight, and so we did vote just a couple of weeks ago, kind of in the spirit of putting this towards compensation. But that said, we got $2 million more from the state than we were expecting to put into compensation. So I would allocate this towards one of the other goals. So.
I would argue to put it towards compensation. We did tell people on June 24th that that's what we were going to do. As tempting as it is to put it in special education, which is my thing, what I find the most important. But I have to go with the commitment I made, which is that if there would be any return, then we would put it towards compensation, and I feel that we need to do that to hold. We have accountability and trust problems sometimes, and I don't want to create one because I know what that can cause. That's why I would put it towards that, but that's my point of view.
Yeah, I fully support putting this towards compensation. I think it's the best use of the money.
I'm in a compensation.
We'll call the motion. It is recommended that the Board of Education approve transferring $185,000 from Fund 10 budgetary reserve to Fund 10 total staff compensation within the June 24th, 2019 board-approved preliminary budget.
I move.
Second.
Anika, your advisory vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes 4-0. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
I second.
Anika, your advisory vote? All in favor?
Matt,
Aye.
I get a right.
All right, we are adjourned.